This is Jocko Podcast number 235 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
Cowie Mayerl, one of my brothers. Awesome guy, incredible SEAL. But at one point in time, I didn't know if he would keep his leg. The Army doctors seemed neutral in their assessment, and my assessment was that they actually didn't know. And because they didn't know, my guess is they didn't want to get his hopes up, but at the same time, they didn't want to crush his morale either. And Cowie is the SEAL that I wrote about in the opening of the book, The Dichotomy of Leadership. This is the SEAL that told me he wanted to stay. He begged me to let him stay there in Ramadi with us. He did not want to go home. He wanted to stay with his platoon. He wanted to stay with the task unit. He wanted to stay with the soldiers and Marines that we were fighting alongside. But the fact of the matter was that he had to go. He had to go. He had to go to better medical facilities with more capabilities to see if he could keep his leg. And we're kind of standing there talking to him, kind of saying goodbye because we know he has to go. The brigade commander walked in. And we all quietly came to attention. And I'd spent a little bit of time with the brigade commander at this point. I'd briefed him on our capabilities, been in some planning meetings. I'd seen him out on the streets during a few operations. He was very well respected amongst his troops. The troops that we were working with, Army and Marines, and his brigade combat team, the 2nd Brigade Combat Team of the 28th Infantry Division, the Iron Soldiers, they had been fighting in Ramadi for almost a year. And we, from SEAL Team 3, Task Unit Bruiser, we had nothing but the highest respect and admiration for all of them. They were professional. They were aggressive. They were courageous. And let there be no doubt that the soldiers and the Marines from the 228 saved the lives of some of the SEALs in Task Unit Bruiser. Because they told us where we should go and where we shouldn't go. They advised us on what to do and what not to do. They rolled out and guided us on operations. They mentored and they coached us. And they did an outstanding job taking the fight to the enemy. And at this point, when Cowie got wounded, we'd been on the ground less than a month. And this was the first significantly wounded SEAL in Task Unit Bruiser. And this brigade commander, Colonel John Gronski, was there to pin a Purple Heart on Cowie's chest. And I watched the colonel, watched his attitude, watched his behavior. He was solemn, but at the same time, he was uplifting. And what I could tell is I could tell that he cared. I could sense that. I think we all could sense that. And understand that at this point, he had done this hundreds of times. in the last year, awarded Purple Hearts to combat wounded soldiers. And each time I could tell that it mattered, and each time I could tell that it left a mark. And I knew that the colonel had also sent many men on their final flights home. Their angel flights. Colonel Gronski had lost scores of men at this point, killed in action. And those obviously leave an even deeper mark. They leave a scar. And I watched as Colonel Gronski spoke quietly to Cowie. I couldn't hear what he said, but Cowie nodded and affirmed whatever had been said. And the colonel put the Purple Heart medal on Cowie's chest. And they shook hands again. And the colonel left. And Cowie was soon on a helicopter heading out of Ramadi. And he would not be our last casualty. But he was our first, and he was my first significantly wounded man while in a leadership position. And if you know anything about me, you know that I'm trying to learn constantly. And I learned from the colonel that day, the way he acted, the way he carried himself. Maintaining that delicate balance. Because I could tell that he was steadfast, that these tragedies would not discourage his determination. But I could also see that he cared, that he truly cared about Cowie. My brother, my SEAL, a man he'd never met before. I could also see that this was part of our job as leaders. We have to bear this burden. I would have to bear this burden. And we would have to press on. We would have to do our duty in the face of horrible wounds and tragic loss. And I knew that Colonel Gronski had been there for almost a year. And I knew that I was just getting started. And I knew I had to do my best to carry the torch forward. To bear that burden of command, to do my duty. And to follow that example. Well, it's a strange thing because those memories of war, sometimes they feel like a long time ago. And sometimes they feel like yesterday. but we don't forget them. And I won't forget what I learned. And it's an honor today to have the opportunity to learn some more from that colonel. Although he is no longer a colonel, he's no longer in the Army. He retired as a 2-star general, a major general who just wrote a book called The Ride of Our Lives, and he is here with us today. General Gronski, thank you for coming on the program.
Jocko, thank you. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, it was really weird to see. I was sitting in my car as you pulled up into the parking lot today, and I mean, obviously I haven't seen you since the spring of 2006, and I remember meeting you for the first time. I don't know if you'll remember meeting me for the first time, and I know it's when you, as the brigade commander, you're meeting people all the time. People are coming in and out. When I met you for the first time, I went to your tactical operations center, and right as I arrived, so we had been on the ground for just a matter of days. Do you remember this at all?
Slightly. I'm going to be honest with you, not in the detail you probably do.
No, I would be shocked if you remembered it. I walked in, and as I walk into your tactical operations center, the report comes in that one of my SEAL snipers, it was actually BTF Tony, had just killed an IED emplacer up on Firecracker. And that kind of got announced in the Tactical Operations Center. And you heard it. And I knew who you were because I had gathered intel on you and read your background and done research to figure out who you were and what, And so I knew exactly who you were. And just that announcement, following that announcement, you walked from the talk into your office, and then people walked me into your office. It was the best introduction a human being could ever want in a combat situation. Right. And you looked at me and you said, "That's one of your guys that just killed an IED emplacer." I said, "Yes, sir." And you immediately said, "I need your guys over in Eastern Ramadi." And I said, "We will go wherever you want us to go, wherever there's bad guys." And that was how the deployment kicked off.
Yeah. Eastern Ramadi was a pretty bad place.
Yeah. And it was, I think it felt good. I mean, I could see the looks on the people in the Tactical Operations Center, the looks on their faces that we had just killed an IED emplacer. And that was right where in Firecracker a few days prior, an IED had killed several Marines. And so often the enemy just, in Ramadi would just disappear. They take their shots, they do their thing, and then they disappear.
Yeah, that was really one of the most frustrating things. You didn't, many times you just didn't have an enemy to fire back at.
Yeah. Before we get into all that, let's go back, because everyone wants to know about you, who you are, and I want to start off actually by reading a little chunk of your book to kind of give a little background to everybody. And so the book is called The Ride of Our Lives. It just came out, I think, in February. So I'm going to read this chunk right here. My dad, Paul Xavier Gronski Sr., was raised by his mother, a Polish immigrant. My grandmother never learned to speak English well. She owned a small grocery store selling primarily candy and cigarettes. My paternal grandfather, also a Polish immigrant, died in an accident in the coal mines near Scranton when my grandmother was 5 months pregnant with my dad. The son of a single parent, my father was forced to quit school after the 7th grade so he could work and help support the family. My dad served overseas during World War II in the U.S. Army Air Corps. Dad opened a garage in 1954 doing minor car repairs and selling used tires. Soon he bought cars to fix up and sell, and so began his venture into the used car business. His family and his business were growing. But Dad and my entire family faced a devastating setback in 1956 when my mother passed away when I was very young. Dad became a single parent with seven children to raise and a business to run. It was a severe blow, but Dad fought through it. By outward measures, my father was unimpressive. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, Dad weighed about 135 pounds. But my dad was a grinder, and he had the blood of an entrepreneur. Through sheer hard work and desire, he raised his children while building an enterprise that included a garage, used car sales, a towing service, a boat sales and service business, and a bike shop. Known as Paul Gronski Enterprises, Dad's business became a landmark in northeastern Pennsylvania. Paul X. Gronski Sr., a man with only a 7th grade education, became a pillar of the community and a leader in his church. So that's the environment you grew up in.
Yep.
Do you remember your mom?
No, she died 3 days after I was born.
Oh. And you were number 7?
Right.
What'd your dad do in the Army Air Corps?
Well, he had a very basic job. He was a cook. You know, he worked in restaurants in the 20s and 30s, and he became a cook. And I think his favorite war story was the time that he prepared a meal for Dwight Eisenhower in the mess hall.
That's a pretty memorable story. I'd be proud of that story.
Right.
And what was it growing up? I mean, obviously you got no mom at home. I mean, look, I got 4 kids, and my wife is a stay-at-home mom.
Right.
And I could barely control the chaos and mayhem going on when they were little. That must have been complete insanity.
Yeah, you know, it allowed us kids to kind of grow up with a lot of self-discipline. I was lucky, though. I had 2 older sisters. They became surrogate mothers to me, my sister Ruthie and my sister Ann. And then I had an aunt, my father's sister, who was also a surrogate mother. So although I lost one mother, I ended up having 3. And I did feel a lot of love in the family.
Was Ruthie that much, or your 2 sisters, how much older were they?
Yeah, they're both a little over 10 years older than I am.
Got it.
So, they were, 10, 11, 12 years old at the time.
Yeah, and that's like 10 or 11-year-olds, when they have responsibility put on them, they can pick it up, and they can do a lot.
Exactly. And, it's just like anything else. You're put in that situation, and you just got to dig deep, and you got to figure it out, and you got to drive on. And again, this was back in late 50s. And I guess it was a little bit more of an austere life back then, and people just were able to stand up to challenges like that.
How big was your house?
The house I grew up in, the best I could recall, my mother passed away. They were living in a single-family dwelling. Mm-hmm. And then, again, I just know this as I was getting old enough to remember things. We were actually living in a house with my grandmother.
Got it.
So my grandmother was in one room. My aunt and uncle were upstairs. They kind of had the second floor of the house, and then everybody else was spread out in bedrooms. I mean, I remember my brother Jimmy sleeping with my father in bed. I mean, they just slept together. That's how it was. I remember sleeping in bed with 2 other brothers. I mean, that's just the way it was back then.
Yeah, if you couldn't come up with a good answer for how big your house was, I was going to say, all right, how many kids slept in your bed with you? Because
Exactly.
I know it wasn't alone.
Right.
You're not in a 7-kid family with no mom and not having to share some bed space.
Exactly. That's the way it was.
And then going to school and everything. I mean, what kind of school did you go to?
Yeah, I went to a public school when I was in first grade, and then I'm a Catholic, so I was put into a Catholic school for second grade so I could receive First Holy Communion without having to go through extra classes like I would have if I was in public school. And then I went back to public school again in third grade and continued my education in public school.
Your dad's an efficiency expert.
Yeah, I guess he is.
And what were your interests in school?
Well, as I got older, my main interest was football. I just really loved playing football. I loved everything about it. I wasn't that great of an athlete. I ended up starting when I was a senior. Finally, when I was a senior, I got to start on the football team, and I was an offensive guard at 165 pounds.
How big was your school? Was it a big school? Did you go to high school in Scranton?
Outside of Scranton, and it was a merged school district. Taylor and Moosic, Pennsylvania, merged together. The name of the school is Riverside. I think we graduated around 100 kids.
How big were the games? How many people showed up?
Oh, I mean, the stadium was packed. And northeastern Pennsylvania, football is king. Yeah, even today, there's very little soccer and a lot of football, although soccer is getting bigger. And, our school had, I think, 3 sports. They had football, basketball, baseball, and I think there was golf. They didn't even have track and field when I went to school there. In my senior year, we had intramural track and field, but never competing against other schools. Now they finally do, but no swim team. There weren't that many opportunities for sports in the school that I graduated from at that time.
Anything else you were interested in, and did you have to work?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, it was kind of like a family farm where, all my brothers and sisters and I all worked in the garage. And I remember even when I was a young kid in grade school, I would be in the garage sweeping floors. I would be studding tires. At that time you put studs and snow tires. Then when I was 16, I began driving the tow truck. And that was pretty cool, to go out, tow cars. Although in the winter, winter in northeastern Pennsylvania, every winter we would get about, maybe 3 or 4 weeks where it was like, much below freezing. So you had to be out there towing cars, jumping cars, with cables and all this, changing flat tires in the freezing snow. It was pretty hard work. But so I guess I got used to using my hands and doing hard work at an early age.
At what point did you start viewing the military as an option?
Well, my dad always, he was very proud of the fact that he had an opportunity to serve. And he always encouraged me to serve. And when I graduated from high school, I went to a college in the local area, University of Scranton, and they had an ROTC program there. My dad wanted me to join the ROTC, but believe it or not, even though I read a lot of books about World War II and I was very patriotic, I was brought up that way, for some reason I just didn't want to have anything to do with the ROTC. And so the first 2 years go by, no ROTC, even though my dad was encouraging me to join. And when I was a sophomore, I get this letter in the mail from the ROTC program saying, hey, this summer between your sophomore and junior year, you go to this basic camp at Fort Knox and decide, if you like the Army. And if you do, then you get signed a contract and join the ROTC. So I go to Fort Knox, Kentucky, between my sophomore and junior year, because really I just kind of wanted to do something different. I guess I was tired of working in the family business. So I forget how many weeks it was. It might have been 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And man, I just loved it. I mean, there was a lot of camaraderie even there. I mean, the drill sergeants, I still remember my drill sergeant's name there, Sergeant Ogden. He was a short, wiry guy, Vietnam vet. And, profanity was all in. I mean, the Jody calls, they could sing whatever they put out there, we sang, and it was pretty profane. And I just loved it. I just loved the physical part of it. I loved, being on the rifle range, the tactical part of it. So I was all in. When I left Fort Knox, Kentucky, I signed the ROTC contract, and I was just so thrilled to be part of that.
Yeah, so then you finish college, and so what year is it that?
Yeah, I graduated from high school in 74, graduated from college in 78, and then I went on active duty. But the thing is, a lot of people don't know this, and I don't admit it to a lot of people, but it's kind of an interesting story. I was commissioned as a
Just so you know, you're about to admit this to about 2 million people.
I know that, but... I'm still proud of my service, but I was a medical service corps officer. Mm-hmm. And the reason I was a medical service corps officer is the eyesight in my left eye is, right now it's about 2,600. At that time, it was 2,400 non-correctable. I had a lazy eye when I was a kid. It was never corrected. And once you go so long with that, there's no way to correct that eyesight. So because my eyesight in my left eye was so poor, I couldn't become an infantryman like I wanted to, because most of my buddies were going infantry or armor, field artillery, combat arms. I was in the commandos at the University of Scranton, which kind of was kind of a ranger-oriented group.
Proud heritage at the University of Scranton, commandos.
Yeah. And so
what does a medical service officer do?
You're an administrative officer. So at Fort Benning, Georgia, where I was first assigned, I commanded a medical platoon in an armor battalion. So I wasn't a doctor or anything like that, but I was kind of like the administrative officer who would lead the medics, provide them the leadership that they needed. And there's usually a physician's assistant assigned to your platoon as well. But that's what a medical service officer essentially does. They could be a platoon leader in an ambulance platoon, as a lieutenant, or a platoon leader in a medical platoon supporting an infantry battalion or armored battalion. That's what a medical service corps officer does. So I did that for 4 years. And then, I was assigned to Fort Benning. Then I went up to Fort Lewis, Washington. And after 4 years, I left active duty, mainly because, as a medical service corps officer, to be quite honest with you, it was just something that didn't really interest me that much. And I figured, okay, I did my 4 years, so now I'm going to get out. And then I had a decision to make whether to stay in Tacoma, Washington, and make a life for myself there, or move back to northeastern Pennsylvania. What we ended up doing was moving back to northeastern Pennsylvania.
Hey, I gotta pick up the book here for a second to read through that kind of decision-making process, because, well, I'll just go to the book. You say here, after serving at Fort Lewis for about 2 years, I left active duty in the Army in the fall of 1982. We stayed at Tacoma, Washington, where I worked as an alcoholism counselor, and Birdie that's your wife,
yes.
Birdie, worked as a nurse. We enjoyed living in the Northwest, but we decided to move to Moosic for a variety of reasons. First, my dad was getting older. I wanted to spend time with him. I also wanted to raise my family near my brothers, sisters, and friends back in Pennsylvania. And then you say, at the humble kitchen table, my plans are hatched and important life decisions are made. Homes are mortgaged, insurance policies are purchased, and weddings are planned. The kitchen table is remarkable. In the winter of 1982-83, it was at our kitchen table where two important decisions were made. The first decision was to leave Tacoma, Washington, the great Northwest, and relocate to my hometown of Moosic, Pennsylvania. The second decision was a bit more adventurous. We decided to make the trip by bicycle. The trip would be self-supported, meaning we would carry our belongings on our bicycles in packs known as panniers. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Known as panniers. We would keep these belongings sparse to save weight. Only one spoon each, no forks, a small pot to cook in, and only one bowl. The pot would serve as the other bowl. I drilled holes into the handles of our toothbrushes. Ounces mattered. We would carry our home with us, a 2-person backpacking tent and 2 sleeping bags that could zip together. Our most precious cargo would be our baby, who at the time of our decision was only about 9 months old. There was nothing we could do about controlling the weight of this growing boy. We would adjust elsewhere. So you make this decision to that you're going to bike across the country. Had you done any long distance biking before this?
The farthest I went before that would be 100 miles. In a ride, a century.
Did Birdie go with you?
Not on a ride of that duration. No.
So you kind of did a little maneuver to get her to say yes to this.
Well, actually, my wife is from Austria. I met her when I was at Fort Benning. She had spent her most of her life in Austria until she was in her early 20s, and then I met her when I was stationed at Fort Benning. She was staying with her aunt and uncle in Columbus, Georgia. So we had only been married a little less than 3 years when we made this bicycle trip. And being that she was Austrian and didn't probably understand the vastness of our country, she agreed to it.
She thought it was a 4-day trip, not a 3-month trip.
Right, something like that.
And really, this book is a great kind of recollection. Did you take notes during this?
Actually, I kept the journal during the trip. Yes.
I was going to say, because you got some really good details in there that bring a lot of life to the story. And I was thinking to myself, if you have a memory like this, then you're the smartest man that's ever lived.
Not my memory. It was the journal.
So, and you got a bunch of great stories. And really, the subtitle of the book is Lessons on Life, Leadership, and Love. And you tell the story, and you also work in a bunch of, the lessons that you're learning along the way. You got some stories in here that are funny. Some of them are not so funny. You got this situation here. I'm fast forwarding through the book. I'm skipping around, but at this point, you had talked to a farmer to see if you could stay the night in his field, which the other weird thing about this book. In modern day, in the year 2020, a lot of the things that you're doing in this book might not be quite as acceptable in modern times, because you're going to random people and saying, can we stay in your yard?
Right.
Can we stay in the back of your house or whatever? So this is one of those situations. You see a farmer, hey, can we set up in your field? And the cool thing was, and you point this out a lot, is a lot of people were, hey, yeah, no problem. Come on in.
Yeah.
We're making dinner. You want some hot dogs, whatever. So that was neat. But at this time, you had set up in this field, nice open field. There's dry grass everywhere, tall dry grass, and you sleep the night, get some good sleep. You wake up in the morning, and here we're going to the book. The morning sun brought the promise of another good day of cycling. The camp stove proved more than cooperative for cooking oatmeal and boiling water for hot coffee than it did for preparing dinner the night before. I looked to the beginning of a great day until I got clumsy. Just as our pot of water reached a boil for our second cup of coffee, my left foot kicked over the camp stove. This sun-drenched, carefree morning immediately turned chaotic. White gas began to run out of the toppled stove, the flame from the burner wasting no time setting the dry grass ablaze. The wind howled from the west and fanned the flames, expanding the fire. The flame shot up to about 8 feet in the air and singed my eyebrows. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. I had the sense that my life flashed before my eyes. Then we flung into action. Birdie righted the stove, and I put my firefighting skills to the test. My only chance was to create a fire break by stamping down the tall grass, and that's exactly what I did. It worked. The fire fizzled out after burning only a few square yards of the field. It was a frantic way to begin our morning. There was no fire or smoke damage to our tent, sleeping bags, bicycles, or to Steven's trailer. Now, I think when you left, he was 18 months?
15 months old when we started the trip, yeah.
Stephen did not recognize the seriousness of the situation. We had a hard time getting him to stop laughing at our antics. So this is the kind of things that you talk about in this book. Some of the lessons that you learn. Another section here. You're just talking about what you're learning. It says, throughout our cross-country bike journey, we were faced with countless decisions about which way to go and which path to take. What I learned was that the path we decided upon was always the right one. It was not so much about which path we chose, but how we chose to negotiate it. It was all about attitude. So those are some of the lessons that you learned on this trip. And the book's really just kind of filled with a bunch of, funny stories, good stories, lessons learned. And people definitely get this book so that you can kind of get that background. But eventually you make it across country. You make it back to Moosic, PA. And there's all these things that happen along the way, and you kind of become a minor celebrity, a minor celebrity in the biking world for sure. Maybe in the country, but in Moosic, PA, it's like you're a town hero.
Right.
And maybe it's Steven, your son, is the ultimate town hero, because he's the poor kid that had to, survive with his crazy parents who biked across the states with him in a trailer.
Well, I think the real hero is my wife, Bertie. I mean,
indeed.
For her to make, first of all, like you said, agree to make the trip, and then actually make the trip, never once whined, never once said, hey, why don't we pack it in and take a Greyhound bus home. I mean, I think she's the unsung hero for sure.
What did you guys average a day?
60 miles, 70 miles, 80 miles. It all depended. We'd get up in the morning, talk about setting goals and intermediate goals. Our ultimate goal was northeastern Pennsylvania. But we'd get up in the morning and look at a map, decide what town we wanted to make it to that day based on terrain and other factors, and then we would set off for it. And usually it was between 60 to 80 miles.
So when you get back, now you're out of the Army, and you're going into, what's the business now morphed into?
The business was very big. There were probably about 40 employees working there at the time. And again, it was everything that you had already mentioned, garage, used cars, towing service, a very large boat sales and service business, and a bicycle shop. all of that. Could you believe all that stuff? And it took up about a block in the town of Moosic.
Where are they using boats?
There's plenty of lakes.
Just a bunch
of lakes in Pennsylvania. Fishing is very popular there, and water skiing is as well.
So you stay in the reserves?
No, actually, well, I did. But when I get back to Pennsylvania, I didn't even know I ended up joining the National Guard. But when I got there, I had no plan to continue my military service.
Okay, so I got that wrong. You didn't stay in the reserves. You had actually left active duty completely.
Well, when I left active duty in Washington, I got in a reserve unit up there. And then I moved back to Pennsylvania with no plan to continue my military service. But somebody said to me, after about 9 months being back, they said, hey, why don't you go down to the Armory in Scranton and talk to guys down there about joining the National Guard. I had no idea what the National Guard was. I really didn't.
Explain the difference between the reserves and the National Guard.
Yeah.
I think everyone knows what active duty is. Active duty is what you think of when you think of the military.
Yeah.
You're in the military. You're in the Army. You're in the Navy. You're in the Air Force. You're in the Marine Corps. You're in the Coast Guard. You're in one of those. That's what you do every day. That's the deal. Reserves and National Guard. Explain those a little bit, will you?
Army Reserve is you have a federal mission. I mean, your main mission would be to get deployed to conduct operations overseas. In the National Guard, you have that same federal mission, but then you also have a state mission. So the National Guard generally, during peacetime or steady state, is under the command and control of the governor of the state. So that's the main difference. The reserves are not under the command and control of the governor. In the National Guard units are. And
it's usually the National Guard that gets called up when a hurricane hits, when there's bad weather, when something like that happens, even some kind of civil unrest.
Yes.
It's generally the National Guard because they are controlled by the state's governors.
That's exactly right. The governor does not have any authority to call up reserve units, but they do have authority to call up the National Guard units. Although there's some talk about changing that. And I'm not sure where we are with that right now with the laws, but generally the National Guard is under the command and control of the governor.
And so that life is similar to the reserves, I assume, and I remember this since I was a little kid. I would hear on the news, or I'd hear the advertisement, they'd say 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer.
Yes.
Is that similar?
That was, and it was that way for the most part up until 9/11. And then after 9/11, everything changed with the National Guard.
How about the first Gulf War? Any impact on the first Gulf War?
Not a lot. Primarily because it was a lot of reserves were called up. I don't know if any National Guard units were called up for the Gulf War. There may have been. Mm-hmm. If there wasn't a lot. Probably primarily logistical units in the Guard if they were called up at all. And again, it was obviously very quick. I mean, 100 hours.
Yeah.
The buildup certainly was longer, but 100-hour war there, so it wasn't very long.
And so you're doing your 1 weekend a month, and you're doing 2 weeks in the summertime. And other than that, you're living your life.
Yeah.
You're building the business.
Yes.
You're selling boats and bicycles and cars and
all that,
towing stuff.
Yeah.
And you're raising your kids. How many kids?
My second son Timothy was born in 1984. So, I had Stephen and Timothy, and that's the two children that we have.
And this whole time, you're getting advanced in rank, right?
Yes.
And this is something that we would always. What's a nice way of putting this? So in the SEAL teams, there's reserve SEALs, but there's not many of them. There's more now. Okay, let me rephrase this. When I was younger in the SEAL teams, there was not a lot of reserve SEALs. No one really even knew about it, and most guys just frankly stayed in the SEAL teams. Mm-hmm. And if they got out, they got out. They were done.
Right.
They got out, and so there wasn't a lot of reserves. So guys that were in the reserves would make rank really fast, like way faster than a normal SEAL. At least it seemed that way. Uh-huh. And at least we held that grudge against them. Yeah. So if someone showed up for their weekend drill and they were a high-ranking guy, you're a reservist, you don't know what you're talking about. But that's what's happening while you're in the reserves, or the National Guard. Even though you're only working 1 weekend a month, you're still advancing in rank.
You are, but it's different. The National Guard rank is much slower.
Okay.
Much slower. Just the way it is. I never knew it was that way in the Reserve SEALs, that they made rank quicker.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's like that anymore, and I don't even know if it's just the way that I was raised by the guys that would look at the reservists and say, that guy only made rank because he's in the reserves, otherwise he's too much of an idiot. You know, it might have just been some prejudice against the reserves that was instilled in me by the active duty guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess my point is for people that don't understand the National Guard and the reserves is that you're still advancing in your career.
Oh, you are, yeah. And you know, you have your civilian responsibility, but you also have your military responsibility. So all of the things that go along with maintaining military standards still exist, even though you're drilling, you know, in theory, 1 weekend a month and 2-week annual training at some other time of the year, usually in the summer. But in terms of physical fitness standards, you've got to maintain those physical fitness standards on your own, because you know you have U.S. Army on your uniform, and that was very important. One thing I did want to back up on a little bit though, Jocko, is you know, when I came back, when I did make that decision to join the National Guard because the guys there seemed like people I wanted to work with. And remember, I was a medical service corps officer when I left active duty. I got branch transferred to become an infantry officer when I joined the National Guard. And this was about 1984, 85 time frame. And really, I became an infantry officer without having to go through any additional training. It was essentially, at that time, and I don't know if it had happened today or not, but again, we're talking about 40 years ago. Almost, you know, it was basically some paperwork that was adjusted to branch qualify me as an infantry officer, and then I took command of an infantry company. In West Pittston, Pennsylvania, and I commanded that company for about 4 years. And just due to a lot of good teammates there and good soldiers there, the company really performed very well, so well that we were given the honor to go to the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California as an opposing force company. OP4 company, which was a big deal for us. I mean, the guys were psyched.
Yeah.
I mean, back then, I think this happened in 86 or so, if memory serves me correctly. That was a big deal for us.
Yeah, and that's actually an awesome thing. So OP4, just to explain people that are civilians opposing force, that means you're going to be the role players that are going to be pretending to be the bad guys. And my SEALs, when I was the training commander out on the West Coast, I had a pack of guys, and that's what they did. They not only taught, but then they were OP4 as well. And the thing that is very important about it, there's multiple things that are very important about it. Number one, the SEALs that we put through training were never going to face a tougher enemy than the other SEALs that were playing OP4. Never. There's never going to be a tougher enemy ever. And number two, when you're on OP4, you learn how to think like the bad guys. You learn what it looks like. You learn how to set things up. And so then you can counter those tactics. So it's a very important learning process. So for you guys, and you probably went out there for a pretty big chunk of time.
Yeah, we were out there, I think it was at least 3 weeks. You know, a normal annual training is 2 weeks, but we were out there for an extended period of time.
Did they send you to any schools or anything when you became an infantry officer?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, that's the next story is when I left command of that company after about 4 years, I just knew I had to do something to gain more credibility. And so I sought out, and thankfully I was able to go to the Infantry Officer Advanced course, the resident course at Fort Benning for 6 months, which was great. And then while I was there, I fought to get into Ranger School. And so I started Ranger School the day my class graduated the Infantry Officer Advanced course. So I didn't go to the graduation. We call it IOAC at that time, Infantry Officer Advanced course. So the day my class graduated was my first day setting foot in the Ranger School at Harmony Church. And It was just something I had wanted to do for a very long time because a lot of my classmates back at the University of Scranton went to Ranger School, just something I really had my heart set on, just like you wanted to go through the SEAL training. And it was a very defining period in my life to go through Ranger School.
How old were you when you went through Ranger School?
Yeah, I started when I was 33. and had my birthday there. So I graduated when I was 34 years old. So I was one of the older guys graduating from Ranger School. That's
old.
For Ranger School, that's all. Now, there's been older guys graduate.
Really?
You know? Oh, yeah. I think I heard stories about a sergeant major who graduated when he was 45 years old.
I salute that guy wholeheartedly.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, it was an ass kicker for me, you know, but I was, you know, just didn't want to quit and just kept with it. And thank God I made it through.
So were you a captain at that point?
I was a captain, yeah, because I was a captain when I left active duty.
And so you're still a captain. You were still a captain.
I was still a captain.
You were captain for a long. Were you?
Yeah.
This is what you were talking about. The reserves takes a long time to get
Exactly.
So you're a captain. So, but you go to Ranger School. You go to the infantry officers course. So now you're starting to feel like
an infantryman. You know, I've got the requisite training that is necessary for one to perform their job the way you should perform your job.
And obviously, it was. Was your dad still running the business?
Yes. Yep.
And so he was okay with you being gone for 10 months.
Yes. And that's about how long I was gone. It was about 10 months.
Did he ride you about it, or was he stoked on it?
Oh, he was stoked on it. Very proud. Yeah.
Because I could also see a little bit of you go play Army, I'll be back here working.
No, he was very proud. It wasn't that kind of attitude at all.
And you said he was in the Army Air Corps.
Yeah.
What year did you graduate from Ranger School?
1991. So I went to the advanced course, the infantry officer advanced course. I started in August of 1990, and we graduated in February. I think it was February 2nd, and that's the day I started Ranger School, February 2nd, 1991. So
the Gulf War happened while you were at the infantry course.
Right.
What were you thinking about that? Was it just kind of...
No. I mean, very interested, obviously, in everything that was going on. But, didn't have to play a role in that.
Did that drive you crazy?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And, when you're in the Army, you want to do your job. Yeah. That's what we train for. So, yeah, absolutely it did.
The Gulf War goes over really quick. Do you remember? So I remember. So I graduated boot camp. I went to boot camp in September 13th, 1990.
Okay.
So the war kicked off after that. But I remember I'm watching CNN with a bunch of other Navy guys, and the report CNN was saying there's going to be 40,000 casualties in the first 48 hours.
Right. I remember that.
And I remember thinking, I'm gonna get mine, because you might have thought you wanted to go to war when you were 33 years old. I was 19, right. And I was completely was hoping to go to war, and so I remember watching that thinking, I'm definitely gonna get a chance, because if there's 40,000 casualties, that means this thing's gonna last a while, and that means I'll be able to go.
Oh yeah.
Which I know people. I know it's hard to understand that concept of wanting to go to war, but hey, you're young, you're dumb, and that's what you want to do. Like you said, you train for it. That's what you want to do.
And the thing is, Jocko, your buddies are going, and you feel like, man, my buddies are going. I want to be there with them. I think there's a lot of that, and and when I say buddies, I'm using that in a very loose term, but I mean my fellow, sailors are going, my fellow soldiers are going, fellow Marines are going, so I want to be a part of it. I think it's that type of attitude.
So that war, like you said, is over 100 hours, and now you're back to work. Mm-hmm. You're back hawking bicycles.
Right.
I mean, you got the experience. You must have been a hell of a salesman and selling bicycles.
We had a pretty successful shop for a time there, yes.
Time goes by. You're still getting advanced in rank. Eventually, you make major. Mm-hmm. Where are you on September 11th?
On September 11th, I am a colonel who had just successfully commanded a brigade for over 3 years, 55th Brigade, which is a Pennsylvania National Guard brigade. And in the summer, I left command in the summer of, I'm trying to remember here. No, Different. I spent a year in Lithuania in the year 2000. So I come back from Lithuania in January.
And was that on National Guard duty?
Yes. Yeah, on National Guard duty. I spent a year in Lithuania because Lithuania is a state partner of the Pennsylvania National Guard. And I could get into that in a little bit. But to answer your question, I get back from Lithuania in January 2001, and then I take command of 55th Brigade in July of 2001. So I was actually in command of 55th Brigade at the time.
Got it.
And what happened is I took 2,000 soldiers from the 55th Brigade over to Europe in 2002 to do a force protection mission there at the Army bases in 4 different countries in Europe, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and Belgium, while the active duty troops were getting prepared to deploy either to Afghanistan or, as happened, to Iraq. So I took 2,000 soldiers over to Europe. Like I said, summer 2002, we spent a little over 6 months over there doing Force Pro. For me, that was an honor. I mean, I never thought I would have a chance to serve overseas, to command soldiers overseas. So to me, that was a great honor. And did our mission as well as we could do it, and the soldiers performed very well over there. And came back from that mission, and then after about a little over 3 years, almost 4 years, I left command of the 55th Brigade.
So that mission, the Lithuania trip, that was 1 year?
Yeah.
What was that job?
Okay, that job is, and let me explain the state partnership program real quick. Right after the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. European Commander, which is a 4-star general, he has the Combat Command EUCOM, they call it, is the abbreviation. He wanted to develop an engagement strategy with former Soviet republics or Warsaw Pact countries to just create better relations with these countries as they were leaving the Soviet Union sphere of influence. And so he talked to the director of the Army National Guard or the chief of the National Guard about getting National Guard states partnered with some of these countries. And so I don't know how the decision was made, but Pennsylvania was partnered with Lithuania. And as part of that partnership, as Lithuania was trying to learn how does the United States military operate, because they wanted to pattern themselves after us, we had various colonels from the Pennsylvania National Guard go over to Lithuania.
Got it.
Spend anywhere from a year to 3 years over there. So in 2000, I was tapped to go over there, and it was just something I was really excited about. Because again, this is prior to 9/11. I thought, man, I'm going to get a chance to serve as a colonel overseas. I mean, this is great. Because who could have predicted 9/11? I mean, I couldn't predict 9/11 at that point. So I thought that was going to be my only shot to serve overseas as a commissioned officer. So I was very excited about it.
Did you get to take your wife on that?
No, it was unaccompanied.
Unaccompanied.
Yeah. But my wife, see, that is just how my wife Bertie is. When I call her an unsung hero, she really is. I mean, she's supported me through everything. We've been married. We're going to be married 40 years this September. So if she didn't leave me after that bicycle trip, I guess I thought, okay, she's never going to leave. But
put her to the test early.
Yeah. And again, I come home one day and say, hey, Bertie, one of the generals from the Pennsylvania National Guard wants me to go over to Lithuania for a year. How do you feel about that? She said, John, you do whatever you think you need to do. I mean, that's awesome. Her whole attitude.
So you did that mission, then you come home, and then September 11th happens, and now you deploy again as a brigade commander.
Yeah, with 2,000 soldiers over there in Europe. And the thing I'm most proud of is the fact that if we had disciplinary problems, we handled it, very quickly. Our soldiers performed well. Didn't embarrass anybody, did their job very professionally as they were conducting Force Pro at these bases. Because, again, after 9/11, you didn't know what was going to happen with terrorist attacks at our armed installations over there. So very proud of the way the soldiers performed. I had 3 battalions task organized to my 2,000 soldier brigade. And leadership at all levels functioned very well, right down to the soldier level, and they performed well. One quick story: I had a former Navy SEAL who was.
I'm sorry.
I guess he was a Navy SEAL.
I'm sure he caused problems.
He really did. Now this guy leaves the SEALs. He gets a job working for this pharmaceutical company because he had some type of degree that he got when he left the SEALs. He was making $250,000 a year with his pharmaceutical company, Navy SEAL. Now he's a staff sergeant in my brigade, working for peanuts, whatever a staff sergeant makes. So he leaves a $250,000 a year job to perform over there as a staff sergeant. I mean, just stories like that with guardsmen happen all the time, where they leave these very, very lucrative positions to get, pay as a specialist, which is an E4. I mean, it's incredible the sacrifice these great Americans make.
Yeah, that's true service right there.
Yeah.
So you come home from that deployment, and now it's 2002.
We got there in the summer of 2000. No, it was 2003. So we got there in the late summer of 2002. And we get back home after the first of the year, 2003.
And at this point, one of your sons is in the reserves or is in the National Guard?
My son Timothy was in the National Guard.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing September 11th unfold.
Yeah. At
what point are you thinking that the call might come to deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan?
For myself?
Yeah, yeah, for yourself.
Well, our 2nd Brigade got notice that they were going to be deploying over to Iraq. And I think they got the notice. They actually got mobilized in January 2005, so they got the notice about 6 months prior to that. So,
and were you the brigade commander yet or no?
No, I was not. I had left 55th Brigade after commanding there for 3 years, a little over 3 years, and I was selected to become a general officer. So I was actually at our state headquarters in an 07 position waiting to get promoted when I heard that 2nd Brigade was going to be going over to Iraq. Now, Jocko, this is the weird thing. When I heard 2nd Brigade was going to get mobilized and go over to Iraq, something told me I was going to go with them. And I don't know what it was. I just believed I was going to go over there with that brigade. And the way it happened is when they actually got mobilized, and that brigade went to Camp Shelby for about 5 months to train at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. And this was January 2005. I get a call on a Friday from the division commander, the 28th Infantry Division, that said, hey, the current brigade commander went through the readiness processing there at Camp Shelby. It was like the first or second day on the ground there. And there was a medical issue, no fault of his own, a very honorable man who wanted to go with this brigade, but had a medical issue that was going to prevent him from going over. And so he was going to go through the SRP testing again on Sunday just to make sure he couldn't go. Mm-hmm. And so Sunday comes, he gets disqualified. And so my division commander called me back on Sunday and said, hey, John, he didn't make it through. Could you be there on Wednesday? And so it's like, absolutely.
Was the division commander a friend of yours?
No, I mean, we had a professional relationship. I won't say he was a friend.
Had you told him that you were ready to rock and roll, as they say?
I actually told him months prior to that, hey, if anything, and I don't even know what I was thinking, but I said, if anything happens where you need me to go with this brigade, I just want you to keep me in mind. And he did. And I was thankful for that, just because it was an honor to be able to go over there and do that job.
Did they put your general selection on hold?
Yeah, it was basically put on hold. I'll tell you the truth, and I'm not saying. I mean, honestly, if I had a choice, and I truly meant this, because I knew there was a chance I might not get promoted, because I was taking on this mission, because just the way it is,
right.
But if I had to choose between the two, serving in combat with those soldiers and Marines or getting promoted to general, serving in combat would be the thing.
Yeah. And luckily you found this out as soon as the workup kind of started, as soon as the training started. You went down there so you missed 2 days, right? I mean, you missed nothing.
Exactly. I mean, I was down there, within the first 5-6 days of their training startup. And kind of an interesting story I want to tell you that kind of links the time we had in Europe with the time of me going to Camp Shelby to begin commanding the brigade. When we first got to Europe in 2002, I had a decision to make as a brigade commander. I had 2,000 soldiers spread throughout 4 countries in Europe. And I made the decision that, hey, when you're off duty, you could drink alcohol. I wasn't going to tell these guys, you're over here in Europe and you're not going to be able to go out and have a beer. And that's one thing I believe in, is not setting not setting out a standard or a rule that you're probably not going to be able to enforce anyway. And plus, it doesn't make sense. Just because a guy puts on a military uniform doesn't make them stupid. You know what I mean? And so these are adults. So I said, you could drink over there. But I said, just going to let everybody know, you get in trouble, you're going to be disciplined. We had a guy who's there about 2 weeks, gets drunk, gets in a fight with a German civilian, throws this German civilian off a balcony. The German civilian loses an eye. So we court-martial this guy, and he ends up in the stockade in Mannheim. Busted him down from an E6 to an E1, from a staff sergeant to a private. Then I had another decision to make. Do I discharge this guy from the Army? So I talked to the battalion commander, and I said, hey, what do you think? And the battalion commander obviously knew this guy better than I did. And he said, he is a good soldier. He needs alcoholism counseling, et cetera, but he said, I believe he's worth retaining. So I listened to what this battalion commander said, so I retained him. Then on Christmas Day, this is about maybe 4 months later or something, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later, Christmas Day, and by the way, while I was over there with these 2,000 soldiers, I was on the road constantly, just doing circulation, seeing how the soldiers are doing. Christmas Day, I wake up and I say to my driver, we're driving up to Mannheim today. It's about an hour and a half north of where my headquarters was. So I want to see this guy in the stockade. It was Christmas Day. Something just told me to go visit him. So I go up. Guard brings him out into the visitors area. I was the only visitor there that day. And he was just blown away when he saw me. He goes, Colonel, it's Christmas Day. You're here to see me. I said, listen, you screwed up. You're paying your dues. You're still one of my soldiers. I said, I wanted to come, see how you're doing, let you know that we're still thinking of you. You're still one of ours. Asked him how the family was doing, all that. I mean, he felt like crap being in that detention facility. Fast forward. I didn't think another thing about it. Left, that was done. It was my duty to do that. I did it. And fast forward to the first day on the ground at Camp Shelby after I went down there to take command of that brigade. Walking through the barracks area, and there's 4 soldiers standing outside of the barracks. And one of them comes sprinting over to me. He stands there at attention, salutes. It's a specialist, an E4. Same guy. And he goes, you probably don't remember me. He goes, but you came to see me in the stockade on Christmas Day. He goes, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate that. He goes, I never forgot that. And then he yells over to the 3 other soldiers that were standing outside of the barracks with him. Because a lot of guys didn't know who I was. Who's this new guy coming to take command of the brigade? He yells over to those 3 soldiers. He said, this is Colonel Gronski. We're in good hands with him. Yeah. And I'm sure, coming from an E4, that meant a lot, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And but it just shows that you just try to do the right thing for people, and you don't just discard somebody just because they made a mistake. And now this guy was going to the most violent place on the face of the earth to continue to serve our country.
Did you guys know you were going to Ramadi?
We learned while we were at Shelby. We learned we were going to Ramadi, And then we kept thinking, man, are they going to change their mind? Because we were getting we were getting all the classified reports of what was going on over there, and we saw how violent it was. And by the way, 2nd Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division was over there at the time. That's who we did the relief in place with, and those soldiers and Marines who worked for that brigade commander, Gary Patton, who was a outstanding American. He ended up retiring as a major general. Very proud of his leadership over there with that unit. But we saw how violent it was, and we thought, man, are they going to send our brigade over there? And they did. Mm-hmm. And I actually talked to a retired 3-star who was the MNCI commander at the time after he retired. And I said, sir, I have to ask you, why did you send a National Guard brigade to this most violent place on earth? And he said, well, I was talking to the 1st Army commander, and he said, you guys were ready. And he goes, then I talked to my boss, who was the M&F commander, and he said, he asked me my opinion. He said, sir, we've been taking risk everywhere else over here. I think we'll take some more risk and put 2nd Brigade, 28th Infantry Division in Ramadi. But those soldiers who were part of that brigade and the Marines who were task organized to us did a remarkable job just because of leadership at every level below me, and just so proud of the work those guys did in Ramadi.
How well did the workup prepare you, the training cycle that you did, and you guys went out to Fort Irwin as well, right?
Yeah, we did. We spent a month out at Fort Irwin as part of that train up. Counterinsurgency doctrine wasn't even published at that time. Coin doctrine didn't exist until after we got back home after 2006. That's when it was published. So we were given the best training that the Army was able to give us, being what they knew at that time, but certainly not as advanced as it became. So the Army did the best they could do with the training they gave us.
And what did you guys have for armor?
I'll tell you, when we got over there, we had what we called hillbilly armor. It was basically armor that was welded on to Humvees. It wasn't the up-armored Humvees. And we had to fight to get the up-armored Humvees we needed in Ramadi, because with that hillbilly armor, there was a slight gap in the door. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could actually see space in between when the door closed and the rest of the vehicle. And you know how the IED threat was over in Ramadi. We had over 1,000 IEDs used against us while we were there. And without the right protection, we were just going to take even more casualties than we did take. And by the way, the brigade that was there before us took in the 80s in killed in action. We took 82 killed in action and about 260 who were wounded seriously enough who had to be evacuated back to the United States. That doesn't count the ones who were wounded who were able to stay there. And then the brigade after us, who you worked with for a lot of your time there, took about the same amount of casualties we took. So, every brigade that was in Ramadi, every Army brigade for, 3 consecutive brigades were all taking in the 80s in terms of KIA. So you needed the protection. And we fought for the protection, and we finally got the up-armored Humvees that we needed to be able to better perform our mission.
Did you guys deploy all at once and straight into Ramadi? Is that how it happened, or how did it, or should I say, how did it happen?
I'll tell you. My brigade at Shelby, I had over 35 different states contributing soldiers to my brigade. I mean, that's amazing. So, you want to train you want to go to war with the unit that you've been training with. But because at that time in 2005, a lot of the National Guard had been used at that time. I had soldiers from 35 different states showing up at Camp Shelby, so now we could start training together as a brigade team. And the other interesting thing, there was not a direct support field artillery battalion in the Guard available to deploy with us. So we had to use a general support field artillery battalion. The difference, the fire support element. A fire support element is where the forward observers are. Usually in a direct support field artillery battalion, there's 135 fire supporters, the guys who call in the fire. In a GS, a General Support Artillery Battalion, there's no FSE because they use forward observers from the direct support artillery battalions to call in the fire. We had to cobble together a 135 soldier fire support element while we're on the ground at Camp Shelby, and that took months to get everybody there in groups of 2s and groups of 3s to put this fire support element together. The reason I say this is this is just a credit to these National Guard soldiers who came together like they did and then did their job superbly. That's why I'm telling that story. It's not a knock on anybody. It's not a knock on the Army. It's a credit to these soldiers who were able to come together and then form themselves as a team to do the hard work that they had to do in the most violent place on the face of the earth for a year.
You know, it's interesting. I'm thinking about a podcast actually a couple podcasts that we just did about the Boer War, and the British went down there.
Yeah. And
what's interesting is it was only a very small part that I mentioned, and the reason I mentioned it on the podcast was because the TA, which is the Territorial Army, which is the reserves in England, they gave several examples, but one specific example where the guys that were reservists, so the guys that weren't professional soldiers, in many cases were the first ones to say, "Hey, wait a second, the way we're doing this doesn't make sense."
Yep.
And they had, I guess they had their minds were more open, and they could adapt, where they weren't so rigid. And I thought I was thinking when you were saying, oh, they made a decision to send the National Guard there. If I was the commander, that may be something that you weigh in and go, look, I need someone that's going to attack this problem maybe a little bit different. So that's an interesting concept. But also just knowing, and I mentioned this at the beginning, the effort that your soldiers and Marines took to take care of us when we showed up literally saved our guys' lives. There was missions. I mean, there's a specific mission that Leif Babin, who wrote these books with me, he was going to go, he was getting from a special operations group, was going to do an operation, and he was going to take some of his SEALs and his Iraqi soldiers. They were going to go and help them. And he brought the plan to one of your majors out of Vermont, I want to say.
Yeah.
And
I know exactly who that guy was.
Yeah,
too.
I do too.
Yeah.
And I mean, and he looked at Leif and said, if you go down the street, you're going to get blown up. Mm-hmm. And you know what Leif said? Leif, a SEAL team guy, a special operations guy, said, thank you. And he listened. And that was our attitude. We were so thankful and grateful that, you all helped us so much when we got on the ground. And just the other thing, we just had complete respect and admiration, as I said in the beginning, because look, we're looking at you. A lot of you all were looking at us like, oh, these guys are highly trained, and we're looking back at you saying you've been in gunfights every day for the last 11 months.
Yeah.
So I can't say enough to thank you and everybody from that brigade that was there on the ground, that welcomed us, that didn't give us any attitude, that didn't give us any. They just wanted to help. And it was an awesome thing to be a part of and to see. So you guys know you're going into a nightmare.
Yeah.
When you got on the ground, like, what was the first thing that you said to yourself, oh, this is real?
It's funny. I had a personal security detachment, which was a platoon out of the Nebraska National Guard. And the platoon leader, awesome leader, Jocko Smith, just a fantastic lieutenant. We were out, and I was out a lot, okay, but always with the purpose. I could tell you a little bit background on that in a minute, but we were out there shortly after we were there, and we had many IEDs used against our particular patrol, but IED detonates. Nobody was hurt. It was relatively not significant. And me and Jacques look at each other, and we go, there's actually people trying to kill us, and it's kind of like, reality set in very, very quickly. And it was like there's people actually like trying to kill us, and I think that reality set in for everybody pretty quickly.
How did you, what was your approach when you showed up? So by the time we got there in April of 2006,
right,
you guys had really secured like all the main MSRs going in and out of the city.
Yes.
What was your kind of larger operational approach when you showed up there?
Yeah, I'd say it was a couple different phases. The first phase was really getting situational understanding of what was going on. And the 2nd Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division really helped us do that. Then the phase after that, I like to think of as getting it was a leader engagement phase. We were really trying to get the sheikhs and the governor, you probably remember the governor, Mamoon, to really support our effort there. We didn't see many imams there, to be honest with you. It was mainly the sheikhs and the governor we were dealing with. And we made a lot of headway there. And then the phase after that, I like to call the murder and intimidation phase, where the insurgents actually got the upper hand on murdering key sheikhs, which hurt our leader engagement effort, which had been successful. And then the last phase I like to call setting the conditions for the next brigade to come through. And that's where we were trying to do our best to set up combat outposts in certain areas where we could then stay there. Now, this is the thing you may not know about our brigade. Remember, we had from Ramadi to Habbaniyah. In May of 2006, I was visited by 2 very senior generals. And the question they asked, what do you need to control Ramadi? And Ramadi was very chaotic at that time because of the murder and intimidation and the lack of us able to engage leaders very effectively because of the murder and intimidation of the sheikhs. And what I explained to them is you needed a brigade in Ramadi proper itself, if you want to control it, a brigade in Habbaniyah, and then another brigade up in Jazeera, which was north of the Euphrates River. And the one general put his head in his hand and just kind of like shook his head, and he said to his senior, he said, "Sir, that's an entire division." And at that point in time, they were trying to downsize. And he didn't push back on me, though. He basically just realized that couldn't do that. One thing that happened when we were leaving and the next brigade was coming in, 5-5 Easting, which was just east of Camp Corregidor, that's where their area of operation ended. So they didn't have Habbaniyah. So the brigade after us came in they were able to put 3 additional battalions into Ramadi. Okay, we didn't. All right, so they were able, instead of putting a battalion in Habbaniyah, they were able to put it in Ramadi. And then they came in with 2 additional battalion headquarters besides that. So they had, from what I understand, they had 3 additional battalion headquarters, 1 full battalion plus another 4 companies. So one of the reasons things started to change is because they were able to mass more troops in that area. And there's a difference between fighting a large-scale combat operation and fighting an insurgency. In a large-scale combat operation, you don't want to mass troops. You want to mass the effects of your combat power. You see, if you're fighting a near peer or a peer, you don't want to mass troops. You want to mass the effects of combat power. When you're fighting an insurgency, that's where you want to mass troops. And I think what the Coin Doctrine came out with was 1 counterinsurgent for every 20 civilians that are in that city. And Ramadi had a population of around 400,000. We had nowhere near what the Coin Doctrine called for. So we were struggling with that. So I believed in the Hamburger Hill principle of never ordering a patrol to go into an area that we weren't prepared to put a combat outpost in and stay in. I saw it as stupid to send a patrol into an area, for 2 or 3 hours just to do a friggin' patrol and come right back out again, because I could deal with losing a soldier or a Marine if there was a purpose, a good purpose to lose that soldier or Marine. I'd have a hard time explaining to a mother or a father why their Marine or soldier got killed for just the sake of going in there for 3 hours and coming back out again. If it was to put a combat outpost in, I could accept that. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? So when I say the Hamburger Hill concept, because, Hamburger Hill, take the hill and then leave.
Right.
It's kind of like, why the hell you want to do that? And I was dead set against that.
Yeah, and I think that's, once the 1-1 showed up, they had enough people that we could go in, set up a combat outpost, and then what you're doing is patrolling to clear bad guys because you're there, and it's a different game. You mentioned the murder and intimidation of the Sheiks, and this was all happening. I mean, I arrived in May. Yes, I arrived in May. And so this was kind of, was it still happening? I remember we're reading the intel reports, and from what I remember, there was like one 48-hour period or one very short period of time where 7 or 8 senior sheikhs were murdered, and the rest of them, almost all of the rest of them, well, a large portion of the rest of them left.
This is what happened in probably around the September time frame. And I'd be talking to the governor and the sheikhs about once a week. Starting in September, they started to see that a lot of what they were telling us, we were starting to change the way we conducted operations. I'll give you an example. When I first got there, we would send patrols into homes without intel just to search the homes. So how would you like it if you're in a house with your wife and 2 kids, and all of a sudden this Army patrol comes in and says, you know what, just for the hell of it, we're going to start, looking through the drawers in your bedroom dresser, And so the sheikhs were complaining about that. It's like, you know what, that makes sense to me. So I said to our guys, listen, we're not going to go in and do a search of a home unless there's targeted intelligence that gives us a reason to, because otherwise we're just making enemies of good people and turning neutrals to be helping the insurgents. You don't want to do that. So, that was one example. There was another outpost that we had north of Corregidor up by a hospital that was up in that area, which I took down. And the main reason I took that down, because I didn't want to drive that route. You know why I didn't want to drive that route?
Because you get blown up.
Because we were having our soldiers get killed driving up there. And it's like, you know what? This makes no sense. Take it down. The cool thing is the sheikhs have been asking me to take that down. So when I took it down, I told the sheikhs, the reason we took this down is because you wanted better access to the hospital without your civilian, your Iraqi civilians going through the checkpoint. So they saw that as, wow, this guy listened to me. What was the outcome? The outcome is in the elections in December, where in January 2005, 2% of the citizens of Ramadi voted in an election. In December 2005, 80% of the Iraqis voted in the election. The sheikhs were encouraging them to vote. Mm-hmm. And so we saw that as, man, we turned a corner. The other thing is we were trying to recruit Iraqi police because we knew we had to get Iraqi police to agree to join and then to go through the training. So we would have recruiting events, and we were getting 2 or 3 Iraqis to show up at the recruiting event and join until January. January 3rd, we had this recruiting event at the glass factory. 200 Iraqis standing in line to join. That's only because of the sheikh encouragement. Mm-hmm. January 4th, we had about 500 Iraqis standing in front of the glass factory to join. Man, we were ecstatic.
Yeah, and just to give a little bit more detail, just to reemphasize what you said, these are 500 local citizens that are tribesmen, where the tribal leaders are directing them, hey, looks like the coalition, looks like the Americans, we're getting on board. Go down and join the police so we can get rid of the insurgents in this city.
The biggest mistake I made was I did it a third day in a row. And on January 5th, I think you know what happened.
Yeah.
Suicide bomber detonated his vest in the middle of 1,000 Iraqis who were there that day. I mean, we were ecstatic. We had 1,000 Iraqis showing up to join when months before we had 2 or 3. I mean, this was a turning point. So this suicide bomber detonates their vest, kills at least 100 Iraqi citizens, kills my best friend, Mike McLaughlin, who was my leader engagement officer, and kills Sergeant Can, who was a Marine dog handler, and wounds several other soldiers, but not seriously. And but any wound is serious if you get wounded, I guess. And totally disrupted the whole thing. The thing I was proud of with that, though, is the Iraqis we already had inside the glass factory. We continued to process them. Mm-hmm. What I did the next day, and again, we were devastated by this. What I did the next day, I called all the leaders involved with that recruiting operation, because that was a battalion-plus operation to pull this off. Got all the leaders in. I said, listen, we're going to do an after-action review, a lessons learned thing on this. And I said, before anybody says anything, and I know your book, Extreme Ownership, talks about this, not this exact incident, but in general. I said, before anybody says anything, I said, I'm the guy responsible for that attack yesterday. I said, so this review, this after-action review, isn't going to have anything to do with putting blame on anybody because it's my fault. This is what happened. I said, what we're going to do is we got to figure out, we got 200 Iraqis showing up next week to get on buses so we could transport them to the police training. I said, we got to figure out how do we make this safer a week from now so the same thing doesn't happen again. And so we took some specific tactical measures to make it much safer. One of the things we did, we got these big Texas barricades, and we formed up 10 different stalls where only 10 people at a time could fit inside of a stall. So if a suicide bomber did detonate their vest, the most they could kill is 9 other people instead of 100. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? And then we set up some other measures. I don't want to get into the detail on this podcast because it's not important. The point is that we made it safer. The next week, even after this devastating attack where 100 Iraqis were killed and some of my soldiers were killed, we still had those 200 policemen 200 civilians showing up to go to police training that next week. And then the thing that happened, that was exactly what you said. When they saw that they couldn't stop these young people, these young men, these young Iraqis coming in to continue to see the process through, that's when they started to murder the sheikhs. And that's what cut out our leader engagement completely, because these sheikhs used to come to the government center once a week to talk to me. 0 showed up. Once they started getting murdered, they weren't showing up. So the thing we were not able to do was protect those sheikhs. And that's what really caused a lot of the turmoil to occur up to the point where you guys got there.
I've heard Mike McLaughlin?
Mike McLaughlin, yeah. Mike McLaughlin.
I've heard him referred to as the Sheikh of Sheikhs. You know, he was one of these guys that kind of got it.
Absolutely.
And was making friends. And
he was that kind of guy. He owned his own construction business. He was a field artillery officer. And since we had the triple deuce from the Utah National Guard as the GS Artillery Battalion, I had this extra field artillery lieutenant colonel there. And so I made him my leader engagement officer. And he was just this type of guy, being a businessman, talking about using National Guard civilian skills. He's an entrepreneur. He was just able to connect with all these different Iraqis. He used to say that Ramadi, because of the Euphrates River and I think it was the Nassau Canal running into the Euphrates River, he said that reminded him of Pittsburgh, with the rivers running together. So he told everybody, he told all these Iraqis that, someday Ramadi is going to be like Pittsburgh, and I'm going to come back and visit. I'm going to bring my wife and kids back here. Yeah.
How long after the glass factory bombing? So then the recruits start showing up again.
Yep.
The insurgents realize, oh, we haven't broken their will yet. We got to start killing the sheikhs. Was that a week later, 2 weeks later?
I'd say it was within 4 weeks. I don't have this on the tip of my memory, but it was probably within about 4 weeks.
The intel that I remember was, I think it was 7 or 8 of the main sheikhs got murdered.
Yes.
And then the other sheikhs, most of them just fled.
They went to ground. Yeah, they either fled or went to ground. And the other reason why Ramadi was so dysfunctional is right when the war started, there were some really heavy-duty main sheikhs living in Ramadi. They all went to Jordan. So the sheikhs that were left in Ramadi were the sub-sheikhs. Mm-hmm. So, but they were still the power brokers there, but they just weren't as powerful as the sheikhs who actually left the country. But even like you said, they got murdered, and that really changed things, because now the sheikhs were not cooperating with us like they had. They just kind of went to ground and were neutralized.
And really, that's the purpose. I mean, that's terror, right? We are going to terrorize you to the point where you no longer will step up.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened.
And that was the Al-Qaeda in Iraq segment who was doing that, because as you know, you being there were different segments of the insurgency. One was the AQIZ, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The other one was the local insurgents, who had a different goal than Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The local insurgents just wanted coalition forces to leave. We could deal with them, because we could let them know that, hey, when things settle down here, when you get enough of your own sons in the Iraqi police, we will leave. We'll be glad to leave.
That's a good deal. You want us to leave? We want to leave.
Exactly.
Let's figure this out.
And then you had the criminal element. And then you also, in the criminal element, they were just concerned with making money by selling weapons. And then you also had this fourth contingent there who were former Iraqi generals. They knew where the ordnance was hidden. There were caches all over the place. They knew where they were hidden. They knew the terrain, and they wanted to regain their status and power again. That was their goal.
You mentioned this very briefly, but you just mentioned being out, and I remember being out on an operation somewhere, and there you are. There's the brigade commander walking down the street, and you just said you were going to mention a little bit about what that mentality was. I mean, I'm pretty sure I know what it is, because I did the same things. Like, sometimes I was going on operations with my troops because I need to go on operations with the troops. Was that a similar mindset that you had?
Yeah. I mean, you could only learn so much from hearing reports. You got to get out there and see things with your own eyes. That was one reason. The other reason is it did a lot for morale. When the soldiers saw that, hey, the commander's out there, they feel like somebody is sharing the load. And in order to build trust, when I talk a lot about building trust, and one of the keys to building trust is to share the load, to show whoever is working for you that you're willing to do the same thing they're doing. And so those were the two reasons I felt it was very important to get out there. But, I read this book. It was called The Clay Pigeons of St. Lo.
Oh, yeah. We've covered it on this podcast right here.
Great
Glover
book.
Johns.
Glover Johns, who was also a hero in the Korean War, too, by the way. But I read that book, and one thing Glover Johns talked about in that book is when he was going with his little command group from point A to point B, and he had his radio operator with him, and he had his S3 with him, and S2, or whoever he had with him in that command group from that battalion headquarters. He decided one day to go from point A to point B without a reason to do that. And mortars came in and killed about 3 or 4 of his soldiers in that command group. And he wrote in the book how the light bulb went off in his head that, hey, when I make a decision to go from point A to point B, it's just not my life I'm putting on the line. I'm putting the life of my command group on the line too, the guys who are traveling with me. So because I read that, I said to myself, I am never going to go from point A to point B just to do a joyride through Ramadi. Whenever I take my PSD out with me, my personal security attachment, a bunch of E3s and E4s and E5s, if they were going to get killed because I was going from point A to point B, I wanted there to be a reason for them to die. And if so, I had to go somewhere with a purpose. And I was out a lot because I had a lot of reasons to be out there. Mm-hmm. But I would never, ever go out just for a joyride because that's not because I was putting those soldiers at risk every time I went out.
How was it? You show up and there was already a Marine battalion already there.
Yeah, 1-5, who excellent combat leader, battalion commander who is now a 3-star general, still serving in the Marines. Matter of fact, all 3 Marine battalions who served with me, because they were on 7-month rotation, so the 1-5 was there. They served with me for 2 months. Then the 3-7 came in and served with me for 7 months, and then the 3-8 came in. All 3 of those battalion commanders are general officers now. The Marine Corps is a small corps, and if you're going to become an infantry battalion commander in the Marines, you got to have your shit together. Mm-hmm. They don't put anybody in charge of a Marine infantry battalion, and all 3 of those commanders were excellent.
Was there any time, people always talk about the competition between the Army, the Marine Corps. I'm not even going to say Navy because the Navy makes up such a small element, but the Army and Marine Corps. I always tell anyone, and as a matter of fact, it's sort of a point for me. If anybody ever tries to, get me to say something about the Army and the Marine Corps, I won't say a negative comment, not even in a joking manner. I won't do it because of what I saw over there, what I saw from those soldiers, what I saw from those Marines. Did you feel the same thing? Just nothing but nothing but let's work together to get this done.
Absolutely, and I feel the same way about you. I will not joke about another service. One thing I learned over there, even from the Army, a lot of times if you're infantry, you think all the other branches don't matter. And I kind of had that attitude before going over there to a degree. And one thing I learned is every branch matters significantly. Every MOS of any soldier, it's all such an important team. And in answer to your question with the Marines, man, I just learned to respect those Marines so much. They respected us. I was a little bit concerned. Here I am, a National Guard brigade commander, and now I've got an active duty Marine battalion task organized in my brigade, and I have an active duty Army battalion. When I first got there, it was 269 Armor before 1st of the 506 got there. I'm thinking, man, what are these active duty battalion commanders going to think of a National Guard brigade commander? They showed me nothing but respect. And I think that's the way you got to do it. You have to, personally, I think, if you're going to work with anybody in the military, you have to come from the perspective that these guys are professional, they know their business, until they give you a reason to feel differently. Mm-hmm. And I feel that way about trust too. And a lot of people don't understand this at first, but in order to create trust in an organization, I think you have to trust your followers first before they will trust you. And the question I like to ask people is this. I say, have you ever worked for somebody that didn't trust you? And people will say, yeah, there's been an occasion where I worked for somebody who didn't trust me. I said, were you able to trust that person? And the answer is always no. How could you trust somebody who doesn't trust you? So if I'm a leader and I don't trust my subordinates, if I just come in with the attitude, I'm not going to trust you until you prove I could trust you, how are they going to trust me? Because you cannot trust somebody who doesn't trust you. So you have to trust others first. But again, those battalion commanders from all 3 Marine battalions, all 2 Army battalions with active duty units that worked with me, showed nothing but respect and trust of me, and thank God I never did anything to do anything that caused them not to trust me. So I'm just so thankful that I had such professionals to work with over there. And then of course the battalion commanders from the National Guard units that were with me. I had National Guard battalion from Vermont, who we never worked with before, that was task organized to me. From Utah with the field artillery unit that was task organized to my brigade, and everybody just came together. And again, I think because it was so violent there, people just knew that, hey, we got to do our job, you know? And it's funny, after coming back and continuing in the Army in a non-wartime environment, it's funny how that attitude changes a little bit when you're in a peacetime setting.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you tell a story about one of your Marines, EOD guys, and really just I would love for you to be able to share that story, and I think you know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. This happened on September 19th, 2005, and I actually earlier that morning we had one of our soldiers killed. He was a driver of a Bradley fighting vehicle. An IED went up underneath the driver's compartment of his Bradley, and he was killed. And later on that day, we had a patrol under the command of a lieutenant from the Vermont National Guard who was conducting a patrol down at the Tamim area of Ramadi. And you may recall there was a railroad bridge down there. And we had an outpost at that railroad bridge that didn't exist before we got there. The brigade that was there before us just didn't have what it took to get down there and put that outpost in. But we put the outpost in, and then we had to secure that area to keep the lines of communication operational so we could rotate troops in and out, get logistics down there, get a QRF down there whenever we had to, a quick reaction force. And so anyway, we had this lieutenant from the Vermont National Guard patrolling that area in 4 up-armored Humvees, and he began to get insurgent fire from around by the railroad bed. And so he ordered his platoon, which was 4 up-armored Humvees, to start maneuvering toward that insurgent position so they could close with them and destroy them. And as he was maneuvering in his vehicle, a subsurface IED detonated that had probably been there maybe about a year in the ground. I don't know. You know, some of these IEDs have been planted there for months. And IED detonates and instantly kills the lieutenant and the 2 soldiers who were in that up-armored Humvee with them. And so 3 KIA instantly. And whenever we would have attacks like this, we would try to, whenever we could, send our EOD team down to do a post-blast analysis to determine the type of tactics, the type of ordnance, the type of procedures the insurgents were using when they conducted these attacks. And the reason we did that was try to prevent these attacks from happening again in the future. And so Gunnery Sergeant Michael Burkhart was the gunnery sergeant who led 2 other Marines down to that site. And it was chaotic down there, you know, but our guys were providing security. The gunny gets down there with with his 2 fellow Marines, and he sees the destroyed up-armored Humvee, and near the up-armored Humvee, he sees this crater, a couple feet deep, about 4 feet in diameter. He just made an assumption that that's where the IED had been placed. So he jumps down in the crater to take a closer look, and as soon as he was in the crater, he realized he wasn't in a good place because he saw 2 152 millimeter artillery shells in the ground in front of him with red detonation cord running into the nose of those shells. So he took his K-bar knife, cut the red det cord, believed he neutralized the IED. He didn't see a 3rd artillery shell in the crater behind him. The devices those insurgents used there were Cineo base stations, which were high-powered cordless phones. They use them a lot in Africa, like in villages, to get telephone reception within their village. So it's a very high-powered cordless phone base, and they would strap that base to the artillery shell and then use a cordless phone about a kilometer away. They usually had about a kilometer distance. They would hit the button on that detonation device to cause the IED to explode. An insurgent was obviously out there in the distance watching, hit the button on that detonation device. Artillery shell blows up in back of Gunny Burkhart, knocks him about 15 feet into the air, lands unconscious on the ground like a rag doll. Our soldiers go immediately up to him. They believe the wounds were very, very severe. They called in a medevac helicopter, and they start tending to his wounds. His pants were soaked with blood. They cut his pants off. He's unconscious. After a couple of minutes, he actually regains consciousness. He's laying there on his back, and he asks the soldiers if he has his legs, because he has no feeling from the waist down. He thought he had both legs blown off, but the soldiers assured him he had his legs. The reason he was concerned about his legs, and he told me this himself, is his dad served 3 tours in Vietnam. On his dad's 3rd tour in Vietnam, his dad was shot in the back by a sniper. Gunny Burkhardt had to grow up as a young boy with the pain of seeing his father confined to a wheelchair because his dad was paralyzed from the waist down. Gunny's worst nightmare was going back home to the States because his dad was still alive, and his dad seeing him also confined to a wheelchair. That's why he was concerned about his legs. But anyway, they said, no, you got your legs. A few minutes go by, they're tending to him. He gets a tingling sensation in his legs. He tells the soldiers he wants to try to stand up, and the soldiers couldn't believe this. And he stands up, and after only just getting blown up 10 minutes earlier, and we had an in-bed reporter from the Omaha World Herald on the ground with him that day. Gunny Burkhardt stands up, and the medevac chopper lands on the ground behind him, and the soldiers go to Gunny Burkhardt. They go, Gunny, we got the stretcher here. Lay on the stretcher so we could carry you to the chopper. And Burkhardt raises his left hand into the air, throws a 1-finger salute at the insurgents, and he says to the soldiers, I'm not going to have you carry me to that chopper on the stretcher. I'm going to walk there under my own power because I don't want the insurgents to have the pleasure of seeing me being carried to the helicopter. And he throws him the finger. And the reporter takes the picture at that exact second. So there's Burkhardt, finger in the air, defiant, groin protector in front of his groin, no pants on, and the reporter takes this picture. And later on that day, the reporter comes in to see me because he had been on the ground with us for almost a month. And he comes in to see me, has a little laptop with him, and he goes, sir, he goes, I know it's been a really bad day for you. Obviously, I lost 4 soldiers that day. He goes, but I want to show you this picture. He goes, I won't release it unless you give me permission. He lifts up his laptop screen and he pulls up the picture, and that picture is across the entire laptop screen. I look at that, and I said, you got to get this in the paper. I said, you got to get this in the paper. And the rest of the leadership story with Gunny Burkhardt is this, though, because it's a cool war story, okay, except for the fact that we have these soldiers die. But the leadership component to the story, as I told you, he had 2 young Marines down there with him that day. Gunny Burkhardt told me himself the reason he didn't want to be carried to that chopper had nothing at all to do with what the insurgents would be thinking. He knew with all the IED attacks we were getting that those 2 young Marines were going to be out there later on that day neutralizing IEDs. He knew he was going to have to be recovering from those wounds. He wanted to walk there to the helicopter as to not shatter the confidence of those 2 young Marines that were out there with him. So the leadership element of the story is even after getting blown up 10 minutes earlier, his main concern wasn't with his own wounds. His main concern was with the confidence of those 2 young Marines that he knew was going to be out there later on neutralizing IEDs. So even after getting blown up, his main concern was with those 2 young Marines who worked for him. And isn't that what leadership is all about? Worrying more about the guys who follow you than you worry about yourself. I just think it's an inspirational story. We had very few politicians coming to visit us or, quote, VIPs coming to visit us in Ramadi, but whenever we did, if I had to brief them, the first slide I showed them was Gunny Burkhardt throwing a finger at those insurgents.
Some of the other things that are happening is you're spending a bunch of money trying to, the provincial reconstruction and development. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we had a lot of money to dole out, and this was the issue. We had nobody from the State Department there with us until I think the last month before we left because it was so violent. So we didn't really have that State Department support, and whenever we would give money to the Iraqis to fix a school or a water plant or whatever, the insurgents would destroy it. So we didn't really do that well with with fixing infrastructure there in Ramadi. And as you could probably remember, there was sewage running down the streets all the time because of the roadside bombs that were blowing up and breaking sewer pipes and everything else. So we did do our best to get into schools. We had patrols going into schools all the time, passing out stuff to the kids. I was in schools. It was kind of a weird environment there because some days, well, not some days, every day you knew you were going to have a high probability of getting shot at or blown up. And yet we tried to create some normalcy, especially with the kids there. And so it was really weird in that way.
You know, we're talking about extreme ownership a little bit earlier, and you know the I opened it up talking about a blue on blue that we had. You were there at the time, and I know there was a lot of different stuff going on, and it probably didn't even make the radar of what you had seen and what you were dealing with. But and it was weird for me because, you know, in the SEAL teams, having a blue on blue it seems like the most impossible thing that could ever occur. You know, how could it possibly happen that a good guy shoots a good guy? How is that possible? And so in my chain of command, after that happened very early in deployment, for me to try and explain to people that this happens a lot in this environment. How often were you seeing those situations unfold?
Yeah. First, let me just say in the Army, just like in the SEALs, we take blue on blue very seriously. As a matter of fact, even in training events, if we're doing a warfighter exercise, which is a computer-generated exercise, if there's a blue on blue event in the warfighter, it's got to be investigated. That's how seriously we take it. I saw blue on blue more often than I would have thought, and it was primarily units passing through another unit's area of operation, where the unit passing through wasn't clear on where certain combat outposts or observation posts were set up, and they would see what looked like, again, a soldier with a weapon in his hand. And I know you talk about in your book with Chris Kyle, actually, where that happens. I remember an interesting situation I'll just mention to you. We had a patrol down in Tamim, which is in southern Ramadi, and they were, conducting their operations down there, dealing with Iraqi citizens and talking to them and such. And then there was a civil affairs team that was not part of my brigade that was also in that vicinity. And there was some small arms fire, and the unit from my brigade that felt that there was insurgents up on top of a rooftop. And this is very similar to a story you tell. And the commander on the ground wanted a Super Cobra, since the Marines were supporting us. Not an Apache, but a Super Cobra, fire on the rooftop at what he thought were insurgents up there. And I happened to be in the operations center at the time. And I guess it's just over time to get some type of intuition. Something just did not seem right. And the fire that this patrol was under wasn't really that significant, where I felt it wasn't, life-threatening to that patrol. And I said, let's just let this play out a little bit more. Let's use some tactical patience here and let this play out a little bit more before I give an order for a Super Cobra to fire on that target. As it turned out, it was the civil affairs team on that roof. And I just thank God. I just thank God that God gave me the presence of mind to wait a little bit and just see how things develop before pulling the trigger on that thing. So it's you just have to, again, use, real big in the Army, especially when you're a lieutenant or something, hey, you got to make a decision. Everybody talks about making decisions quickly. Sometimes the best decision to make is, let me use some tactical patience, and let me just see how this plays out a little bit until I get a little bit more information before I pull the trigger on something.
Yeah, the other part of that is not getting emotional, because as you know, and we were talking about earlier, I think before we even started recording, is a lot of times you wouldn't see who's attacking you.
Right.
and you're losing guys. Guys are getting wounded. Guys are getting killed. And now all of a sudden someone's telling you we see the bad guys. It's hard not to just have an emotional moment to say, hey, oh, there's bad guys there. Let's get them.
Yes.
And you have to take a moment to make sure that the decision you're making is the right decision. And like you said, sometimes it's a pause. And I've been talking about this a lot lately. So one of the principles of leadership that I talk about all the time is default aggressive, which means you're going to make something happen. Make it happen. Like don't wait. But if you pay attention to that term, default aggressive, it's the default mode. It's not the mandatory mode. It can be overruled. It can be overridden. The Marine Corps just came out with a new book called Learning. And one of the terms that they use throughout the book is they try to train Marines to have a bias for action. Same thing. It's not blind action. It's not take immediate action no matter what. It's lean towards taking action. That's the same thing with default aggressive. It's, hey, your default mode is I'm going to be aggressive. That doesn't mean you are necessarily going to be aggressive.
Yeah. And when you're engaged in fighting a counterinsurgency, the other thing is you don't want to kill an insurgent at the expense of killing innocent civilians. And that's something, from reading history since I was a teenager, especially World War II history, all of the civilians that were killed during World War II. And I remember when I first got to Ramadi, this is how I had learned as I was there. We talk about continuous learning, is I would say to the sheikhs, hey, this is a battle going on here. Civilians are going to die. You got to accept that. They didn't want to accept that. That was their tribesmen. They didn't want to accept that, these civilians are going to die. And I learned through the course of time there that we had to do, if we wanted to win this thing, we had to do all we could do to not kill innocent Iraqi citizens. And if that meant not killing an insurgent in order to save 3 innocent citizens, you were better to, I felt, you were better to operate that way.
Yeah, I think that's the standard. That's the standard. That's the American way. And that's another thing. And we've talked about this a little bit. And this is, I don't like to get wrapped up in people that are gonna argue political points about the way things unfolded. The way things unfolded, right? But one of the things that you hear a lot is people will talk about, when I say this, I'm really talking about there's people that just look at the Iraq War as this complete horrible thing. Everything was wrong. And one of the things that they say all the time is that all these civilians died. And something that I try and point out to people all the time is, yes, you're right. Civilians died. And yes, Americans did kill some of those civilians, but we went through extreme measures and took extreme risks always to prevent any civilian casualties. And the amount of civilians that Americans actually killed is not a big number. The reason that the number of civilians killed is so large is because of the insurgents and because of the fighting that took place in the Shia versus Sunni, for instance. It really, the amount of civilians killed by Americans is a very small number when you compare it to what the insurgents did to the people of Iraq.
No, I absolutely agree. It is our values, and the thing I'm most proud of the Marines and soldiers I worked with over there and the SEALs I worked with over there is the adherence to our military values and to our American values of doing just that, taking great pains not to kill a civilian, even at the risk of not killing a bad guy. So very, very proud of them. Quick story I want to share with you. The governor that we talked about, dealt with him a lot. He had to have a medical procedure conducted at one point in time. So since Ramadi was so dysfunctional and chaotic, we had to send him to Baghdad to an American military treatment facility in Baghdad. He was gone about 2 weeks for this medical procedure. He comes back and sends a message that he wants to see me. So I go see him. And he asked everybody in the office to leave. You know, he usually had this entourage of sheikhs in there and his staff. Everybody left except him, me, and my interpreter. He sits down beside me. First time he takes my hand in his. And for anybody who knows anything about Arab culture, when an Arab man takes another man's hand in his, it's a sign of trust and respect. First time he ever did that. And he said, you know, Colonel Gronski, many times you have sat here, you've talked to me about American values and the values of your Marines and soldiers. I never knew what you were trying to tell me. But he said, when I was at that American medical treatment facility in Baghdad, I watched with my own eyes how a wounded insurgent was brought into the trauma center there. And I saw how your American medics and nurses and doctors struggled to save the life of this insurgent. And he said, I could not believe how hard you Americans worked to save the life of one of your enemies. He said, now I finally realized what you were trying to tell me about American values. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that really hit home, that he saw with his own eyes how we treated our enemies fighting to save the life of this insurgent.
From a leadership perspective, and really from a personal perspective as well, I mean, I know there was months where you took very significant casualties, you know, and when I look at the glass factory and what a just insane setback, and even hearing you talk about it earlier when we weren't recording, you know, just the you know, that for you, seeing the local populace showing up. I mean, this is the dream for a counterinsurgency, is that we're going to get the local populace. They're going to take to the streets and clean up the insurgents, and this is how we win. And all of a sudden, in a matter of days, a pathway to victory is actually visible. And then to have that horrible incident take place, losing, you know, your best friend over there. And yet you still have to press on. What is it about? How do you do that mentally? How do you get up? How do you move forward when you take these significant setbacks?
You know, Jocko, I think the answer is pretty simple. It's because, especially when you're in a leadership position, you've got others counting on you. So because you've got others counting on you, you have no choice but to continue to, even in situations like that, to try to be as positive as you could. You know, one thing I did over there, because, you know, the days over there could seem like Groundhog Day to the average soldier out there on a patrol day after day, you know, seeing, you know, these Iraqis give him the stink eye and all that, and having his buddy killed and wounded and all of that. Groundhog Day. I actually put out what I called success cards on a monthly basis, because the average soldier didn't understand the success we were having, and it had to be communicated to the average soldier and Marine. So what would be on the success card? Okay, we found this many weapons caches this month. We detained this many high-value target insurgents this month. We actually did engagements in this many schools this month, et cetera, et cetera. So there was always something to be able to communicate that you succeeded on, that if you were just the average soldier out there doing your job day after day, you might not have seen that. But I think people have to understand when they're in a situation like that, leaders have to have a way to communicate the bigger picture to their followers so they understand you are making progress, because otherwise it could seem like you're not. But in answer to your question, I think it's just about the fact that people are counting on you. You got to do your job.
Mm-hmm. As you guys are nearing the end of deployment, I show up there, Task Unit Bruiser. One of the first things that we start planning for is like a Fallujah style clearance of Ramadi. And the plan, as I understood it, and again, seems like a long time ago in some ways, and this is one of those ways, trying to remember exactly, but the plan that, as I remembered as we were starting to organize this thing, was that when the 11 AD showed up, and we have the 228 and the 11 AD on the ground at the same time, we got double the combat power, we're going to do a massive push through. And I was telling my guys, from a political standpoint, it made sense to me because this is why I told my guys, I said, look, I think this is going to happen. And the reason I think it's going to happen is because Maliki, who just is the prime minister, and he's a Shia, and this is a city filled with Sunni people. And I bet he's going to say, yep, go for it. I happen to be wrong. And Maliki was a lot smarter and was a lot more willing to try and work towards a stable Iraq, because he realized that, no, actually, we're not going to do that. There's too much death. There's too much destruction. It will look exactly like what it is, which is a big Shia army push into a city filled with Sunnis and a bunch of Sunnis getting displaced, and it'll be bad. I actually, on one of my podcasts, was discussing this with one of my friends, Daryl, and he had read some information that was all the plan for a big push through was actually kind of a feint to try and get insurgents to leave. And I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if you know it's true or not. Yeah. What do you remember about that?
Yeah, I remember there was talk about it. Mm-hmm. But the other crazy thing, there was talk about not having a brigade come in to do a relief with us. A serious talk about when 228 leaves, there's not going to be another brigade there. So it went from one extreme to the other. I did hear talk about a major push, and through the city to quote clean it out, and then I heard talk that there may not be another brigade to come in. Actually, the brigade that ended up coming in there wasn't really identified until shortly before we left. Mm-hmm. So I think it was a lot of leaders from both sides, Iraq and United States, trying to figure out what the best course was. And it was a very complex situation, very chaotic. And I think they were just trying to really figure it out.
I was in between my first deployment to Iraq and my second deployment to Iraq. I was the admiral's aide. So I worked for the admiral in charge of all the SEALs. Great guy. And that put me in a lot of meetings that a 03 would never be in. Some of those meetings in the Pentagon, with the highest, the highest leaders in the military. And I saw that. I saw that there was people inside the military that were wondering if we could win, and wondering how we could win, if we could win. The report that came out in that summer in 06 said we can't win. It's unwinnable, an unwinnable situation. So the idea that both those options were on the board actually kind of makes sense, because I guarantee you had some people saying, we can't win. We can't win in that area. And then obviously some people saying, hey, we just need to get the combat power that's needed, and we need to commit to it.
Yeah.
So, wow.
There's an old saying, you can't kill yourself out of an insurgency.
Yep.
You can't kill enough insurgents. There's always going to be more insurgents. And even my mindset changed while I was there. Initially when we went in, our mission statement was to defeat the insurgency, take away their will to fight. And it actually evolved into protecting the populace. And there's a big difference between, hey, let's see how many insurgents we could kill versus, hey, let's protect the population. And to protect the population, you need a certain amount of mass of troops there. And I do think what happened when the follow-on brigade came in, they were able to mass more troops, which is great. Mm-hmm. And I give all the soldiers and Marines credit for the great work they did with 2-2, with 2nd Brigade, 28th ID, and then with the Ready First. I mean, the credit belongs to the average soldier and Marine that was out there slogging it out every day, the average SEAL that was out there doing their job every day, and not giving up. Yeah, theirs is a perfect example of resiliency. Even with those odds stacked against us, our soldiers and Marines just would not give up.
Yeah, my task unit. What was good about my task unit, and I think what was really appreciated, was we could kill those bad guys, and we could kill those bad guys, and it was you could see, you talk to a company commander, any one of those company commanders that were out there, they'd go out, they'd get in patrol, they'd get in a gunfight, they'd shoot at some people they wouldn't really know. We would leave dead bodies in the streets of the insurgents, and it was of the insurgents. And that just seemed to be a really good asset and something that made the conventional guys, man, they were so happy when we'd show up at one of their combat outposts. Yeah. They would be so happy for us to show up there because they knew that they'd send out a patrol and they'd get in a gunfight for sure. And sometimes they'd kill a bad guy, but they knew that we would rack up these kills. And what's good about it is it allowed us to eliminate the bad guys while protecting the populace. So it was a great tool in this environment to help out, and that was, that's one of the main things that people talk to me about is, how do you build relationships, right? And how do you build relationships with people? And for me, it's real simple. You build a relationship by saying, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. And that's why when I walked into your office and you've got 6,000, I guess you include Iraqis, 10,000 troops there. And I'm not thinking about me and what can I do. I'm thinking, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. And that's the attitude, and that's the same attitude we took with the 11 AD. When they showed up, it wasn't, hey, we're here. It was, what can we do to help you? What do you need from us? How can we be of assistance? And then the relationship is, oh, we can definitely use your help. Mm-hmm. And then guess what? They give back to us help. So it's pretty
Yeah. Jocko, a lot of things go through my mind as you're talking, and again, you had that great attitude of how could I help. I remember when 269 Armor left. They were with me for the first 6 months we were there, and then 1st of the 506 comes in. So what's the difference between 269 Armor and 1st of the 506? You're talking about an armor battalion versus a light infantry battalion, okay? So just because 269 was rotating out doesn't mean they didn't need tanks there. So this is a great story about resilience, I guess you could call it, with this National Guard platoon that I had working with 269 Armor. It was a platoon from an armor unit in the 28th ID, platoon of soldiers. So that was, I think we had about 40 soldiers there. And they were tankers, though. But when they get to 269 Armor in East Ramadi to work with them, I task organized them to, I task organized an entire company there, armor company. And but 269 Armor didn't need them to be armor soldiers. They said, hey, you guys be motorized infantry because we got enough armor soldiers. So that's what they were until 269 Armor leaves. And then the first of the 506 comes in and they said, we still need tanks. So we took a platoon from this armor company, put them on tanks because they were trained tankers, and they just talk about pivoting. Okay, we're talking about pivoting with COVID-19. These guys pivoted from being tankers to being motorized infantry while 269 Armor was there, and then 1st of the 506 Infantry comes in. They pivot back to being tankers, get on tanks, and did just a fabulous job. And they had several main gun engagements in downtown Ramadi while they were working with 1st of the 506. And the 1st of the 506 loved them. I forget what month it was, but I know there was a IED that destroyed a tank in the Malab area, which you talk about, where the soccer stadium was. And the tank commander was able to get all of his crewmen out of that tank without anybody getting wounded or worse. And there was a fight that went on down there for at least 24 hours. And a few soldiers were killed during that engagement from the 1st of the 506. But it just goes to show how these soldiers are so adaptable, so agile, able to pivot like that without complaining. It's kind of like, this is what you need us to do? We'll do it. Isn't that an amazing story, though? How many soldiers from other armies could make that type of pivot and do it in an outstanding manner like those soldiers did?
Yeah, it's just it shows you the power of the American military to have that kind of attitude, because it's interesting as you say that. Hey, how many people could pivot? And you're just talking about the pivot. you're not even talking about the fact that these guys are doing combat operation after combat operation after combat operation in the Malab district with subsurface IEDs, destroying tanks, destroying Humvees. These coordinated attacks that they're doing, the vehicle-borne IEDs. I mean, you were talking about the checkpoint on the railroad, right in between Tamim and South Central Ramadi. That is a checkpoint that got overrun.
Yeah,
it got overrun by the enemy. Massive Iraqi soldiers killed and wounded. Most of the Iraqi soldiers deserted after that and never came back. But that's the kind of the enemy there was really good.
Yeah,
and they used the same. They used combined arms, between RPGs and mortars and machine gun, and then vehicle-borne IEDs. They coordinated over the radio. They had medevac procedures. I mean, they did what military units did.
Yeah, it was a military unit, and they had a goal of creating a caliphate. Yeah. I mean, that was their goal. Talk about purpose. Talk about inspiring people by giving them a purpose. That was their purpose in life, was to take over Ramadi so they could have that as part of what they thought would be an emergent caliphate.
So it's really interesting. That's full spectrum between a Fallujah-style clearance and a hey, we're leaving and not coming back.
Yeah.
That shows you where the war was. I mean, it really does. Now we start getting towards the end of your deployment, and we're starting turnover procedures. And at some point, obviously, it went from hey, we're going to do a massive kinetic sweep to all right, we're going to continue this counterinsurgency. We're going to start doing this in a less kinetic way than a Fallujah style. And it starts to become time for you guys to kind of pack up, head home.
Mm-hmm.
When you guys as a unit head back, how long does that redeployment take?
Well, the relief in place. Mm-hmm. About 2 weeks. So, we call it left seat, right seat.
Yep.
So for the first week that the brigade that's going to take our place gets there, we're still in the left seat or the driver's seat, and they're observing. And then for the second week, they're in the driver's seat, they're in the left seat, and then we're in the right seat observing them. So in theory, it's about 2 weeks, and that's about what it was. Maybe it was 10 days instead of 14. And then when we get back, we went back down to Kuwait for a few days, and then got back over to the States here. I think it was Fort Dix where we actually demobbed at, and that was, I think, about 5 or 6 days. So there really wasn't that much time to decompress before sending these National Guard soldiers, which I commanded, obviously, like we already talked about. I had some active duty forces with me too, but for the National Guard units that were with me to go back into their civilian environments, it wasn't a lot of decompression time when you get right down to from leaving an environment like Ramadi. I mean, a dangerous, chaotic environment like that, to going back and doing whatever their civilian job was. But that's the other thing about the Guard that I don't know if we emphasize it enough, is the unique thing with the National Guard. They have their military training, so they could do their military skill, but then they also bring civilian skills with them. I'll give you an example. I had some officers who worked in the police departments here in the States, and we had them working with Iraqi police to try to help them become better police. We had everything there. We had bankers, we had carpenters, we had electricians, and a lot of that led to creating a better infrastructure at our combat outposts and other places, so our soldiers could live a little bit more of a better life when they weren't out on patrol. So a lot of these civilian skills that the Guard have actually pays dividends when you go into a combat situation. A lot of people don't think about that.
It's crazy for me to think. Now, we've kind of changed our perspective now on how you decompress people. And even like in the SEAL teams, when we came home from Ramadi, we got on a plane, we flew home, and we were home.
Yeah.
Well, to be quite frank, what we did was we went to a bar and we drank, and they had guys to shuttle us home with one new guy would drive our car, and the other new guy would drive one new guy would drive us in our car to our house. Another new guy would follow him and take him back to do the next run for the next guy. Not exactly what you would call a good plan for decompression, and now they do a much better job. But it's one of the best things that you can do when you come home is you want to spend time with the people that you were there with. You want to tell stories. You want to get it out of your system. You want to laugh. You want to cry. You want to kind of, like you said, decompress. For the soldiers coming home and then they're rolling back into a civilian job, and all of a sudden they're not seeing their friends every day, the people that they just served with. What did it look like from your position as the commander as all that unfolded? What were the reports coming back? Were guys getting in trouble? Was it useful? And one thing that I tell military guys all the time, active duty guys, when they get out, whether they just get out or whether they retire, I'm like, you got to find a new mission, right? So I imagine some people, hey, it's time to go back to work. Okay, go back to work. They kind of get back into that mission. But for me, I always see guys that have the most trouble when they don't have a job to go into. They don't have anything to do, and now they kind of the devil's, what is it? The idle hands are the devil's plaything.
Yeah. I think I had 35 states contribute soldiers to 2nd Brigade, 28th ID, and so. The main states were Vermont, Pennsylvania, and Utah. So for those states, I think things were a little bit easier because at least you still had soldiers from your state, from your unit, even though you might be miles apart, but still relatively close in hand. But for the other soldiers we might have got, 40 soldiers from Illinois, or another 130 soldiers from Michigan. I mean, a lot harder because people don't know what those soldiers really went through. I mean, they read about it, they saw it on the news, but they weren't there. And you probably know, Jocko, that it's pretty hard to talk to somebody who hasn't been there about what we've been through. I could have a much easier time talking to you about this than I could to somebody who's never been there. And even if I'm just talking to an acquaintance somewhere, if they never served there, I really don't like to talk about it too much with them. Now, if it was somebody who was there, yeah, a little bit more of a bond. So it is very difficult for National Guard soldiers because they're not staying in the same military post or base that a SEAL is or that an active duty soldier or Marine might be. So that is a difficult part, and we just try to keep an eye on each other, and that's what we tried to do when we came back home. I will tell you, there were some suicides. And there were some other issues that even to this day soldiers are still trying to deal with, and it's a never-ending fight once you come back from a place like that.
What was your situation when you got home? Did you stay on active duty for a while? Did you go back to work?
Yeah, I did stay on. At that point in time, I wasn't with the family business anymore. At this point in time, I was already off working with a consulting firm in the Philadelphia region. So, I stayed on active duty for a few months, and then I went back to work. One thing I did have the opportunity to do, we did have 15 of our Pennsylvania National Guardsmen get killed in action over there. And I had an opportunity to I just made it a point to go see the families, and I just have to say how much respect I have for the families. And as you know, whenever one of our brothers get killed, and thank God, although I had 200 female soldiers with me in the brigade, none of the females were killed over there. But I always feel bad for the family. I feel bad if I lose a friend, obviously. I feel terrible about it. But the thing that hits me most emotionally is when I think about the family, what the family is going through, what that mother and father are going through, what the brothers, sisters are going through, what the wife or, going through, the spouse is going through. And that's what gets me most emotional when I think about that. And I wanted to go and visit those families, and they're remarkable. I thought there might be some that would be very, very angry, and every one of them respected the sacrifice that their loved one had made. So that just really heartened me about the fact that it was, even though it was the soldier that made the decision to join, the family still supported that decision and supported the sacrifice that they made, and that really heartened me in a way. I do want to talk about, I don't know if you know this or not, but we created a war memorial to the fallen that we lost.
I do know that. I've seen it.
It's pretty special. It was around December of 2005 that I was talking to my sergeant major, and we decided that at that point in time, I can't remember exactly what the number of KIA was in December, but it was at least 40. I know that much. And we just decided that we should create some type of memorial to these soldiers and Marines. And by the way, at the end of the day, by the time we had left there were 3 Navy corpsmen that had been killed in action there too. But at any rate, we put out the word in the brigade that we wanted to have a memorial to these soldiers. And one of our Pennsylvania National Guardsmen came forward with a design. It was a female. She was an art teacher in her civilian job. And she put out this concept. I remember when she described it to myself and the sergeant major, I think in early January, it actually brought tears to my eyes. It was an obelisk, and a pair of dog tags for every soldier that was killed would hang inside of this obelisk, and it would have cuts through it. The cuts looked like it was shrapnel cuts, and a machine gun fired into it too. And as the wind would blow through this obelisk, as the dog tags would clink together in the wind, the symbolism was the fallen warriors as they continue to speak to us. So think about that. And so we had our soldiers in the maintenance units build this memorial in Ramadi. We dedicated it on Easter Sunday, April 16, 2006. We dedicated it. We had, I think it was at that time, about 72 of our soldiers had been killed and Marines, and others had been killed in action at that time. And we had the deputy commander from the Marine Division there for this ceremony we had, and all the battalion commanders were there. And it was just a special tribute. And we took a risk because you don't want that many people, congregated in one spot at any area in there. And we did have our share of rockets and mortars falling on the Fort Operating Base. And we had this memorial ceremony in April. And then when we left there in June, we deconstructed it, put it in a Connex, shipped it back home. And then in October 2016, we rededicated it at Fort Indiantown Gap. It still stands there to this day. I think it's one of the only war memorials that was designed and built and dedicated in a war zone and then deconstructed and rededicated back here in the United States. I don't know if there's another memorial like that. When we left Ramadi, there were 81 pair of dog tags hanging in that memorial. Our last soldier died after we returned. He was a sergeant, a field artillery sergeant, who had serious burns and for months was in treatment at Brooke Army Medical Center and succumbed to his wounds that he received in November of 2005. He succumbed to those wounds in July 2006. And he was the last set of dog tags that we hung inside of that memorial. And again, it took me years before I could explain to you what I just did without crying. And just that symbolism of and I was there on Memorial Day. The symbolism as the wind blows through that obelisk, and those dog tags clink together, those fallen warriors continuing to speak to us, I think is just so powerful. And that's why I think events where we do something in honor of a fallen warrior are so important, because I believe whenever we speak a fallen warrior's name or do something in their honor, we keep their spirit on earth alive. I think there's something powerful to that, keeping their spirit on earth alive. Think about that. I'm sorry to deviate here for a minute, but we do this March for the Fallen that I think you're aware of. It's a 28-mile ruck march we do at Fort Indiantown Gap, very similar to the Bataan Memorial Death March. We usually get about 1,000 people there every year. And everyone does that ruck march in honor of a fallen warrior. And when you're out there doing a 28-mile ruck march with a 35-pound pack, your feet are bleeding a little bit, you're sweating, you tear up now and then when you're thinking about what you're doing. What better dedication to keep the spirit of the fallen warrior alive? It's just amazing. I just think it's an important thing to do. Memorial Day is an important holiday. Remembering our fallen is so important. We could never forget the sacrifice they made, and we could never forget the families that are still suffering to this day that lost loved ones in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And that memorial march is up. It's open to the public, right?
Yeah, it's open to the public. It's September 26th this year. So far, it has not been canceled because of the COVID or anything. If people Google March for the Fallen 2020, it'll come up. I just Googled it today to make sure, what it would come up, and it came up. I Googled March for the Fallen 2020. It was the first thing to come up. You'll see it's at 14 Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, 28-mile ruck march in honor of those fallen warriors, and just a great tribute to keep the spirit of these fallen warriors alive.
No doubt about it. That's and I remember seeing that obelisk when I got there. You guys were still on the ground. I think I got there right around the time it was dedicated. I mean, I forget the exact date. I'm gonna actually try and figure that out because I should know that date. But you were telling me earlier, and I agreed. You asked me if I kept a journal in Ramadi. I said no, and you said you hadn't either, and both of us wish that we had because you just the little dates like that of they mean a lot. And but I remember seeing that, and of course. It's very sobering, for when I showed up there. And look, we knew what we were getting into. And so, to see that monument, to see those dog tags and know what each one of those represents was definitely a very somber and very solemn moment. And you're absolutely correct. Every time you talk about the people that the people that you lost, their spirit's still here.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the best things about the job that I do. I go around and talk to companies, and even right here, right now, this is what we're doing. We got friends, we got people that sacrificed so that we can sit here today.
Yeah.
And we can never forget that. Yeah. We can never forget their families.
And it should inspire our warriors to continue to adhere to our values and continue to drive on with whatever mission it is, because of all these soldiers from every war that made the ultimate sacrifice to build the country that we have. And I know, obviously a lot of social unrest, and there's a lot of things that may not be perfect about our country, but I could guarantee you this, after being over in Iraq, after spending the last 3 years in Europe and traveling to about 40 different countries over there is no country that is as great as our country in many, many different ways. So it's an imperfect country, but it's a country that people from all over the world want to gravitate to and come here. We just got to all work together to keep this country great. That's what that was about. We all work together to gain the promise that our forefathers wanted this country to be. And they probably, when they wrote that Constitution, they knew it wasn't a perfect Constitution for a lot of reasons, primarily because of slavery. And we have to just keep working at things to make this country what it needs to be. And we all need to work together to achieve that.
You ended up going to 40 different countries?
When I was over in Europe.
In the last 3 years?
Yeah. And many of them many times over.
So was that, so you got home from Ramadi. What was your next, what happened then?
Yeah, when I got home from Ramadi, I did get promoted to become a one-star. I worked at our Joint Force headquarters at Indiantown Gap. And then in 2011, I was asked by our Adjutant General to come on full-time. So I served full-time for a year as one of the Deputy Adjutant Generals at our Joint Force headquarters. And then I was given the honor of commanding the 28th Infantry Division for over 3 years. So I did that full-time from 2012 until 2016. And then in 2016, I had the honor of getting an assignment to go to U.S. Army Europe in Wiesbaden, Germany for 3 years as one of the deputy commanding generals there. And I served over there, again, for 3 years, worked with our NATO allies and other European partners and I have the greatest respect for our allies over there. Was in Ukraine many times, to the training center that we have there. As a Ukrainian battalion rotates out of the Donbass region where they're still fighting the Russian-led separatists there. And by the way, when I left there, about 30 Ukrainian soldiers were getting killed every month. So, I mean, it's still a war going on in the Donbass region. But battalions would rotate out of the Donbass, the Ukrainian battalions. They'd come back to western Ukraine, to a training area that we had there. And the United States, Canada, Lithuania, and Poland would work together to help this battalion train to be a more effective fighting unit. Mm-hmm. And so was there many times. But yeah, spent a lot of time in Poland and the 3 Baltic countries, down in the Balkans. I mean, I was all over the place.
Do you speak any Polish?
Very, very little. Yeah, I could say goodnight and hello and those type of things. The funny thing is, my grandmother and father, my grandmother died when I was 10. So I remember my grandmother and father speaking Polish together. And the reason they didn't want to teach any of us kids Polish is so they could talk in Polish without us knowing what they were trying to say. So they didn't try to teach us the language.
One of my friends that was in the SEAL teams with me, his dad was a Mexican.
Yeah.
And and the kid looked Mexican, and I said, and he had a little bit of an accent. A little bit of an accent just from growing up with his dad, who spoke Spanish, and who, to this guy's admission, he said, my dad didn't really speak English very well at all, and his mom spoke Spanish too. And I said, oh, so that's why you have a little bit of an accent. He said, yeah, that's probably where it comes from. And I said, well, at least you speak Spanish. And he goes, no, I don't speak Spanish. His dad refused to have him speak Spanish because his dad wanted him to be an American.
Yeah.
And even though his dad wasn't, great with English, he wouldn't speak to him in Spanish. And I thought that's where you were going to go, because that was kind of the old attitude was, hey, we're in America now.
Yeah.
So, interesting story. I did, have this little thing that you put together when you were the commanding general there at the 228. There was a couple little things I just wanted to highlight.
Oh, you mean at the 28th ID, not the 228?
Oh, sorry. Yes, the 28th ID. Yeah.
Right.
When you were the division commander.
Right.
You had a sort of a guidance for your troops, and there's just a couple good leadership things in here. It says every leader is trusted and expected to use disciplined initiative within the commander's intent without wasting time requesting permission. Report up as the situation develops. Request further guidance or support as necessary. Demonstrating a high level of initiative is worth the risk of making honest mistakes. So, great, concise statement there.
Yeah, I think that came from my time in Ramadi, where I realized, as we were in distributed operations there, I mean, most operations were conducted at the platoon level there. Mm-hmm. And, the situation was so dynamic that you couldn't waste time asking your higher level leader, what should I do? You had to show initiative. And so when I came back, I knew our soldiers were going to continue to deploy overseas. As a matter of fact, we have elements of our aviation brigade in Pennsylvania getting ready to go over to Afghanistan. And I just knew this was going to be a long war. We were going to continue to deploy troops over there. And I realized one of my jobs as a division commander, even if we didn't deploy the entire division over there, I had units going over, had to get them ready to fight in chaotic situations. And the best way to do that was to help them understand the need to develop initiative. And we had to do that in a training environment so that when they got to a combat environment, they would continue to do that. This is the thing. If in a training environment you don't allow your soldiers, or in a civilian organization, you don't allow your people, say in a steady state operation, to demonstrate initiative, then when you get, as a soldier, deploy overseas, if you're not used to displaying initiative in a training environment, guess what? It doesn't automatically flip a switch in its combat. Now I'm going to show some initiative. That doesn't happen. The same in a civilian company. If you don't allow your employees to demonstrate initiative, steady state, then when you hit something like the coronavirus, COVID-19, hey, they're not automatically going to display initiative. So I think it's important to encourage that before you're in a crisis.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That was always my main goal. That's the fourth law of combat that I talk about is decentralized command, and it's the most powerful of the laws of combat that I talk about. Not that the other ones aren't powerful, but you can't have decentralized command unless you have cover and move, unless you keep things simple, unless you prioritize and execute. Those things don't really work. Decentralized command cannot work without those three. But once you implement decentralized command, this is what allows a team to really do well.
Yeah.
Is everybody leads. That's what you want.
Yeah.
So what was your last tour in the Army?
My last tour in the Army was as one of the deputy commanding generals at U.S. Army Europe. I served there from 2016 to 2019. I left Europe in April 2019 and then retired in Pennsylvania in June 2019, 2 months after I left Europe.
And then at what point did you start writing the book?
The funny thing with the book is, again, I did this bicycle trip with my wife and 15-month-old son in 1983. So here it was, 2019, just retired from the Army, sitting around a fire pit with my younger son, Timothy, and he starts asking me questions about this bike trip. Because, believe it or not, I didn't talk about it all that much for some reason. And I start telling him stories, and we're laughing, and he goes, Dad, you should write a book about it. And so I get back home, I'm talking to my wife, and she goes, John, I think that's a good idea because your kids and your grandkids need to know the story. And I do have 2 grandchildren. And I said, you know what? If nothing else, just for the family, to have the story. So I took this journal that I kept on the bike trip that was sitting in a shoebox, literally a shoebox for over 35 years, used that as a basis to write the book. And then because I'm as passionate about leadership as you are, Jocko, I wanted to put a leadership component in there because there were so many leadership elements to that bike trip. And so I wrote the book. I started in the fall of 2019 and then was able to get it published in February of 2020.
Quick turnaround. Like I said, there's a ton of stuff, great stuff inside this book. I want to read one more chunk of it. Pretty good chunk here. And this is the part called leadership. And look, you've got these leadership lessons kind of strewn throughout, and you put an exclamation point on them here. You say this: character, competence, and resilience are essential for effective leadership. Leaders must be true to their values even when their backs are against the wall. Leaders must cultivate trust by trusting others first, sharing the load, and following through on promises. Leaders must care more about those they lead than they care about themselves. Leaders must clearly communicate a vision or an action plan that is realistic and believable, be problem solvers, and have the courage to make decisions. Leaders must help others develop and become stronger, and leaders must be fit in many ways, including physical, spiritually, mental, and emotional fitness. Leaders must have the resilience to overcome adversity. Resiliency is not only about toughness, but it's also about exuding positive energy that inspires others. Having a positive attitude is essential. We choose how we feel. We can choose to be happy or sad, angry or calm, upbeat or down. Organizations and teams take on the attitude and personality of their leaders. The attitudes of those on the team reflect the leader's attitude. If your team has a bad attitude, look in the mirror. And that's an example of some of the, just powerful leadership lessons that you have inside this book. Ton of other ones in there. And, I know we've been going for almost 3 hours right now. And as I told you earlier, I could sit here and listen to your perspectives on this stuff all day long. But I'm not going to keep you as a prisoner here. General Gronski, let's talk about where people can find you, what you're doing right now. I know you've got your consulting company. Tell us a little bit about that and where we can find you.
Yeah, the consulting company is Leader Grove LLC. Website, leadergrove.com or johngronski.com. Both websites link to one another. And I'm pretty active on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, so people could search for me there.
And your Twitter is JL Gronski. Your YouTube is John Gronski. Your LinkedIn is John Gronski. Your Facebook is John Gronski Leads. I didn't find your Instagram. You got an Instagram?
Yeah, John Gronski Leads is Instagram. Yeah,
you're getting on the gram, as Echo Charles likes to call it. That's where people can find you. You're available to speak. You're available to do consulting, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. I'm a professional speaker. I do leadership consulting. I have many different clients throughout the country, and I love to do it. I'm passionate about it.
Awesome. Echo.
Yeah, something.
You got anything? So just so I know you listen. You said you listen to the podcast, and I'm sure you know that Echo's been sitting here for 3 hours, and something caught his mind 2 hours and 32 minutes ago, and he's been having this question brewing.
You noticed that?
Yeah.
But Jocko, I don't want to be like the only person in the United States who doesn't listen to your podcast. So yes, I listen to your podcast.
Oh, man. Oh, this is actually going to be super simple and easy. I think you mentioned something real quick and brief. The left seat, right seat.
Mm-hmm.
Like what is that when you transition?
When one brigade is getting ready to leave and another brigade is coming in to take over that mission, the brigade that's getting ready to leave for the first week is in the left seat, which means they're still in the driver's seat. They're still doing the mission, and the incoming brigade is observing in the right seat, in the passenger seat. And then the following week, the brigade that is now newly taking the mission will be in the left seat or the driver's seat, and the brigade that's about to leave is in the right seat observing. And then once that is done, the brigade that was there is gone home. And to be honest with you, Echo, usually most units want that to be done as quickly as possible, to be quite honest about it.
Maybe feel like they're holding their hand or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we got this already kind of thing. I thought of it in terms of how with your kids, right? You want to train them to do their own stuff, right? And just simplifying it like that and having that to kind of consider the whole situation or whatever. I feel like that was kind of useful. Because I figured that's what it meant. Yeah. Left seat, driver's seat, passenger seat. After a certain amount of time, when the passenger's like, I think I can drive.
Yeah. Well, that is kind of a way to train somebody. You know, first you do it and let them observe. No, first you tell them how to do it. Then you do it and have them observe. And then you have them do it and you observe.
Yeah. And then after a while, you just kind of leave.
Yeah, and they got it.
Yeah.
It's the way it works. My recommendation is you stay humble. When you're getting a turnover from somebody, man, listen to what they say. Yeah, they know things you don't know. And it's actually crazy to me to think about trying to transfer knowledge. Like when the guys came in to relieve Task Unit Bruiser inside Ramadi, I was trying to tell them, everyone in the chain of command is just trying to give them all this information because you know how hard it is. Yeah. And you're just trying to give them. There's no possible way you can transfer them all the knowledge that you have, and you're doing your best. So when you come into those situations as a leader, open up your mind, open up your brain, try and absorb what people are telling you. You might have a different vision. It doesn't matter. Listen to what they say. Have an open mind. Sir, you got any final thoughts?
Just one final thought. We talked about the experience over there, and the final thought, I guess, is how important families are to everything we do. We can't do what we do without the support of our families. And I remember a senior leader telling me a number of years ago, one of the Army values is loyalty. And he said, when we talk about the Army value of loyalty, it not only means loyalty to your unit, it also means being loyal to your family. And that really stuck with me because I didn't hear too many senior leaders talking about that up to that point. And so whenever I talk to soldiers after that, I will always remind them, you got to be loyal to your family as well as to your unit. And I think that's very important. So I guess the final point is we just got to be so thankful for the support we have from our families, whatever that family unit might look like, because we can't do what we do without the support of others.
Amen to that. And once again, thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you for teaching all these great lessons about leadership and life. And of course, and obviously, thank you for everything you did for America for 40 years of service. And specifically, thank you for what you did for the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that served with you in the Battle of Ramadi. You and your troops set conditions for victory, and the men of the 228 will always be revered by the SEALs of Task Unit Bruiser for guiding us into combat and standing by our side on the battlefield. And we will never forget the sacrifice of those fallen heroes, those iron soldiers who gave their lives for us. Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Jocko. It's really an honor to be here with you. Love the message that you get out there and Echo gets out there alongside of you. Thanks for those important leadership messages you get out. I have to tell you, I did read Extreme Ownership, and I loved every page of it. It's an excellent book and something that anyone who's interested in becoming a better leader could learn from.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And with that, General John Gronski has left the building.
Yes.
Awesome to see him again, and awesome to talk to him, and awesome to get those lessons learned. Mm-hmm. Now they must be applied. Yeah. Echo Charles, any lessons that you think we could apply? Any things we could do to make ourselves better?
Yes. Left seat, right seat.
You like that one?
Yeah, very much so. And here's the thing: it made sense. Like I wasn't confused as to what it was, because once you realize, oh, you're talking about the driver's seat and the passenger seat. That's what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And because you know how like when you're trying to train somebody up, which actually you talk about like a long time, from a long time ago. I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. But when you try to do that, it's like, what's the best? Now I got to be a good trainer and like all this stuff that I worry about. And I'm talking about like kids. I'm talking about like various, things. Mm-hmm. But that's a good, just simplistic way of like keeping your mind wrapped around it, and actually in a way, a method, right? Like I'll just do it. You just watch. If you have questions, ask. I'll even walk myself through it while I'm doing it. Teaching my daughter how to make rice, or I did like a year ago, whatever. And yeah, I'm just walking her through, and I actually did that. The whole front seat, not front seat, back seat, left seat, right seat. Did it. I said, boom, this is how many cups of water. Boom, this is how many cups of rice. You're doing it, and she's just listening. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. I just walk her through it, but I do it. Do it again. Do it again. Not the same day. I'm just saying day after day. And then after a while, you're like, okay, let's switch seats. But I'm in the front, so I'm in the passenger seat, right? Still offering, tips or whatever. Worked good too.
Tips on making rice.
Yes, sir. Okay. Without a rice maker. In Hawaii, everybody has a rice maker. You just put the rice in the water. You press the button. It's good.
You press the what?
You press the button. Easy money. Either way, rice, no rice, whatever. This is what we're gonna do. Supplementation.
Let me go deep on this right now. Okay, so I was up on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes.
I got a COVID-19 test.
Yes.
There.
Yes.
When I got the test, a doctor came to give me the test. He gave me the test. He pricked my finger. We had to wait 15 minutes.
The antibody test, though, to be specific.
Yes, to find out if I've had this, if I developed this. He knew, I was telling him, hey, look, I went to Seattle, I went to New York, I went to San Francisco, I went to LA. I mean, I was in the hot zones. I was at ground zero for COVID at the end of January, on planes everywhere.
Yeah.
He and kept traveling. I stopped traveling March 14th, I think. I was traveling in airplanes all over the place. I did not have the antibodies. And what he said was, with the amount of travel I've done, the amount of exposure I've had, I've been exposed to it. He said sometimes people's immune systems are strong to the point where it doesn't even register This little COVID-19 rolls in and it just gets crushed.
Yeah.
So, immune system, 2 things. Look, vitamin D3, which I take, Jocko Fuel, D3. I take it. I take it every day. As a matter of fact, I take more than the recommended dose for whatever reason. I take one in the morning, I take one at night. I take Cold War, which has all those immune supplementations. Yeah. And for some reason, look, I'm healthy, yes. I eat good, yes. Why not just kick it up? So, who knows? Who knows? I'm just saying, maybe not a coincidence. Yeah. Like you heard what Dr. Rhonda Patrick said, right, on Joe's podcast, talking about vitamin D and how helpful it is, how it helps with that. Yeah. I take that religiously. I take the Cold War religiously. And all of a sudden, I'm in all these horrible places, and I'm just COVID-free, no factor. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Hey, man. Yeah,
look, can I make a claim that these supplements will stop COVID-19? No, I can't make that claim, but I can tell you a little story. Yeah. So anyways, look, those are the facts. A lot of exposure, no COVID-19, no, and oh, by the way, we're doing jujitsu at Vic. There's all. I mean, it's crazy what I expose my immune system to. No factor. Yeah. What? COVID? What?
Yeah.
So try those out.
That is crazy because even when you think about it's not like you're, let's say, a singer, or whatever, you're putting on concerts, singing into the microphone, sign a few autographs, even a bunch of autographs, and then you roll out.
I'm shaking 1,000 people's hands.
Hugging a bunch of people.
I'm bro-hugging people. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, shaking everyone's hand.
Shaking everyone's
Straight up. Everyone.
Having conversations with them.
Basically.
Close-in conversations where they're like telling me a secret about something.
Yeah.
They're in my face.
When they started the social distancing, when that became an actual word or whatever, the number one thing, handshakes. Number one thing.
Oh, yeah.
And you're doing that with everybody, different
lines
cities,
of people from all over the country. By the way, when I went to those cities, there was, whatever percentage of the audience, they weren't from DC. They weren't from New York. They drove there from wherever else. So you got this massive cesspool of bacteria, and I'm just all up in it. But I got that D.
Yeah, sure. Hey, man. So your body was just like, hey, we don't need antibodies for this little thing. They're like, what? It's kind of like, when you're in a, I don't know, maybe the police force or something like that, where it's like, hey, we have a situation. Then the police force mounts up and they're like, okay, what's the situation? Then they say the situation. They're like, oh, no, we don't need all these guys.
Exactly.
Bro, send Fred from the front desk or whatever.
He's got that
they'll just handle business, whatever.
So that's what happened.
Yeah. Interesting. The Cold War is there to also discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline, go. This helps your brain, So if you want to figure out how you did or did not get COVID-19, and you figure it out better, I guess, with the discipline.
Check. You might need some protein, get some milk. Your kids might need protein, get some your kid milk. Mm-hmm. You might need some ready-to-drink cans, which I've been drinking today. Get some. Plus, you can get this stuff at originmaine.com. You can also get it at the Vitamin Shop.
Exactly right. Yeah. Also at originmaine.com, get some cool jiu-jitsu stuff. Gis, rash guards, other stuff too.
Yeah.
On there. Also jeans, American-made denim. American-made denim. Not the kind you go down to wherever and get them sewn and bleached. And do they bleach jeans? Yeah, sometimes. Or acid washed. Remember acid washed?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, it's old school. Or distressed or whatever, because they distress jeans in the factory.
We're gonna make our stuff look like someone's lived in them.
Yeah, like someone.
Someone did something cool. And by the way, it's so obvious when you see those what do they call that?
I don't know.
No, there's a word. Distressed.
Yeah, like pre-distressed.
Jeans.
Factory distressed.
Distressed. Come on, man.
Yeah, and then ship them over, and then then hey, here's some jeans, which I don't know. It's not that, is what I'm saying.
Yep.
All made in America. The actual denim made in America.
Also, we got boots.
Works of art, as it were.
According to
people.
Yeah, order those. Get what you need, man. We're there, and we're making everything that we're talking about in America. That's what we're doing. That's how we're doing it.
Also, Jocko's store. We have a store online store, jockostore.com. This is where you can get your discipline equals freedom hoodies, t-shirts,
Rash guards.
hats, women's stuff on there as well, tank tops and shirts, whatnot.
That's if you want to represent while you're on the path.
True. Very, very true. I could not have said it better. That is true. Yes. Also on Jocko Store, we have an email list. I'm not going to abuse anyone's email ever in my whole life, ever. Straight up. I'm making that proclamation right now.
Okay.
But if you want to sign up for our email list, when I say our email list, it's like mine and Jocko's. Those are the only people who are going to email you.
Mm-hmm.
Straight up. So if you want to sign up for this, it's mainly going to be store stuff. And not like every day emailing you, oh, we changed the color of our website. Bro, I don't email that kind of stuff because I don't think anyone really cares about that stuff. Only if there's like a new design or, yeah, that's pretty much. So maybe like once a month. I don't know. It's not very often, but I'm going to put extensive effort into making it stuff that I really believe that it is worth sending out. You see what I'm saying? Worth receiving, worth opening up as an email.
You're making me want to sign up for your email list just so I can police you to make sure you're not sending out stuff that you shouldn't be sending out.
I should be policed.
No, I'm saying if I was a listener, because I am on the email list, but if I was just a listener out there in the world, I might go, Echo's making a claim. Yeah. I'm going to check him.
Good. I think that's a good thing to do.
If Echo sends a lame email, let me know.
Respond to it and just say, hey, this was a lame email. So maybe check next time you send, maybe confirm it or something, check, give it a once over. I don't know. But nonetheless, for real, I respect the inbox.
Check. Also, we got a podcast right now that you're listening to. If you want to, you can subscribe to it. If you want to, you can leave a review. We also have some other podcasts. We got the thread that I'm still working on a name change. Every good name I think of is kind of taken, so I'm bummed out. We have the Grounded podcast, which is about jiu-jitsu and life. We got the Warrior Kid podcast for your Warrior Kids. We also have Warrior Kid soap from IrishOaksRanch.com. It's also available where?
On JockoStore.com.
On the JockoStore.com. Young Aiden making soap. Building a business. Who here was building a business when they were 12 years old? Now, he's older now, but he started that business when he was 12. Credit. Don't forget that we have a YouTube channel. And at some point, Echo Charles is going to start putting Easter eggs of special effects into the YouTube version of this podcast. Yeah. Maybe a little sound effect, maybe an explosion. Some good opportunities today.
Technically, those aren't Easter eggs.
Okay, what are they?
Sound effects.
Okay. Well, he's not just sound effects, visual effects. Maybe some smoke, maybe some fire, maybe some explosions. It's funny that you make a 4-minute video and you show 97 explosions, but you do a 3-hour video and there's nothing in it. Well, what do you think people think of that?
I think explosions have their place in the world, and
I do too.
Well, we'll have varying levels of agreement on that whole topic.
Don't you think people would? Okay, do you think watching a 3-hour YouTube video is boring? It's you and me talking. Do you think that might be boring to someone visually? 3 hours.
Well, visually boring and boring are two different things.
I said visually boring. Yes or no?
I can see.
Yes or no?
If put it this way, well, it's not a yes or no question, really.
It is a yes or no question. Is it boring to watch 3 hours of a video of two humans in a black room talking to each other?
Not a yes or no. It's not a yes or no question.
All right.
Yeah, it depends who the humans are. It depends what they're talking about.
Okay, politician.
No, we gotta get. You gotta understand.
Okay, well, let's say it was some subject like someone trying to explain how to cook rice. Do you think that might get boring? Now, if the rice cooker was blowing up, people would be stoked.
I understand.
You see where I'm coming from here?
Okay, I understand.
Check.
Anyway.
Yes. Subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Yeah. Subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to see that. And Echo does make other enhanced videos, and if you want to see stuff blow up, you can see it there. Mm-hmm. If you want to be bored, then you can watch the 4-hour podcast of.
It's not boring. How about that?
Okay. Visually boring.
Anyway, psychological warfare. If you're having a moment of weakness, which we all do, had one the other day, powered through it, by the way.
What was it?
Lifting weights.
Oh, you didn't want to
But
lift?
I didn't feel like it. Freaking didn't feel like. But this was like next level. Didn't feel like it. The kind where, you know, the kind where you don't feel like it's so hardcore where you're like, man, something might be like wrong with me, like my physiology. You know, I wasn't feeling physically weak necessarily, but I was just like, maybe like something's going on. Maybe it's like actual like burnout. You know, that deal.
When I do 20 rep squats, heavy, sometimes while I'm doing them, I'm thinking to myself, I don't care. I don't care if I'm strong. I don't care if I'm in shape. Whatever I'm doing right now, I would rather be watching TV. I just want to stop this, and that's right. That's a bad thing. Watch out for that.
Yep. So the point is,
and then I get mad about that, and then I do.
Bro, I use that because you and Joe Rogan were talking about that. How you like get mad at yourself.
Get mad at that.
And here's the thing: it's easy to be like, "Oh, that's a good thing. I'm going to try that." But if you don't genuinely get mad at yourself, it totally doesn't work. Like you can kind of get mad at yourself, or maybe feel guilty later, but that's different. That's not even the same thing. If you're for real mad at yourself that you literally deserve punishment immediately, like right now, for your ways
load
of
up the bar.
Yep, exactly.
Load up the bar and get under there and get some.
Man, if you can get there, if you can pull it off mentally, very, very helpful, by the way. But let's say you can't. Guess what? Psychological warfare. Boom. Listen to Jocko. He'll tell you pragmatically, give you practical ways to think and be like, oh, yeah, wait, why should I? No, I shouldn't skip this. I should actually do this workout.
Get yourself through that moment of weakness.
Yep.
Also, if you want to get a visual little reminder of what you should be doing, then check out flipsidecanvas.com. My brother Dakota Meyer making things you can hang on your wall that will snap your brain into place a little bit. Also, we got some books. Obviously, the book that we talked about today, The Ride of Our Lives by John Gronski. We got The Code, the evaluation of the protocols. Check that one out. We got Leadership Strategy and Tactics Field Manual. We got Way of the Warrior Kid 1, 2, and 3. We got Mikey and the Dragons, apparently, which is the best little kids book that's ever been written. A lot of people are saying.
Yeah. Agreed.
Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual. Imagine that. A field manual on discipline. And then Extreme Ownership and the Dichotomy of Leadership, which I wrote with my brother Leif Babin. Also have Echelon Front, which is my leadership consultancy where we solve problems through leadership. Go to echelonfront.com. If you got any issues, you got any problems in your company, they're leadership problems. 100%. Think about what I just said. 100%. You do not have any problems that aren't leadership problems. If you don't believe me, go to echelonfront.com. We'll come and show you what's up. EF Online, this is our online leadership training. It's not just training, it's us, it's me. You want to talk to me? Go to efonline.com and come to one of the multiple per week live interactive webinars that I'm doing right now with the rest of the Echelon Front team. Go to efonline.com. All kinds of good stuff on there. Unbelievable community brigade of people in there getting after it. Also, the Muster live event. We're doing the next one in Phoenix, Arizona, September 16th and 17th. Dallas, Texas, December 3rd and 4th. Go to extremeownership.com for details. And look, we might have to adapt when it comes to social distancing and whatever else we got to do to pull these things off. So the amount of seats that we have available might be smaller than what would normally be available. So if you want to come to the muster, then get signed up now because we've sold out everything, even with all the capacity being used. Go to extremeownership.com to do that. We have EF Overwatch. If you or your company, you need experienced leaders in your company that understand the principles we talk about, go to efoverwatch.com to find the people you're looking for. And don't forget about americasmightywarriors.org. Mama Lee, Mark Lee's mom. She's out there. She is on a mission to help service members, active duty, retired, folks that just got out. Help them, help their families, help Gold Star families around the world. If you want to participate in that, if you want to donate, if you want to get involved, go to americasmightywarriors.org. And if you haven't had enough of my tedious talking, or you need more of Echo's ridiculous rants, then you can find us on the interwebs. On Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. Echo is at Echo Charles, and I am at Jocko Willink. And once again, thanks to General Gronski for coming on. And thanks to everyone in the military for your service, especially those iron soldiers of the 2nd Brigade, 28th Infantry Division, for your service and your sacrifice in the Battle of Ramadi. We'll never forget you guys. And we'll never forget your fallen brothers. And to the police and the law enforcement out there. And I'll throw a special little shout out to Timothy Gronski, Pennsylvania State Police Trooper, General Gronski's son. To all of you out there, and then also firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, correctional officers, Border Patrol, Secret Service. You're doing all that hard work out there, getting very little support. Well, just remember that there are a lot of people that know what you do, know the risks that you take, and know how many people you help. And to everyone else out there, we do not know everything. We do not win every time. We all make mistakes. Learn from them. Learn from them and get better. And get back on the path. And of course, get after it. And until next time, this is Echo and Jocko. Out.